And what ended up happening is we started adding so many things to this case that we couldn't get the case. We were running out of space inside of the case with all the extra large motherboard we put in there, plus all the added RGB. And then, although it's a large case, it really doesn't give you much more room, because the front of the case has that, for those of you who remember, has that spinning Asus ProArt board, the Z890 board. And I gutted everything out of this computer, and I think most of the parts have all been repurposed at this point. I think we used a Cooler Master case to house that extra large MSI Meg motherboard, if you recall correctly. And let me go back over here to camera 1. There we go. We had purchased this Panorama 360 that was intended to go into that case, but again, we were already running out of room. So to put this in there, it was really just getting worse. And by the time we were done, if we had completed that project, all you would see are cables and wires, and it wouldn't look the way it's intended to look. The aesthetic of it was really an important part of that build, which 20 years ago, we didn't have glass covers, okay? We could have put all this equipment in there, and all of this equipment would have cost less because of the RGB and the added cost. Or this Panorama 360 is a very large bent screen that goes over the water block that allows for animations to play, that when they play where the two screens meet in the corner, has a 3D effect without requiring any glasses. You just have to stand in the right place. It looks like things are coming out of the screen, but only if you're looking at it from the right angle. And they do this like on giant billboards in Japan, and it's a really neat effect. And you can look here on YouTube and search for it to see some, this massive scale and how it really looks like they're the items, the characters. It could be Spider-Man, it could be a large cat, are reaching out through the screen. It's really freaky. And the fact that it does that without any requirement of glasses, you just have to stand at the right place to look at the billboard, and it gets that effect. So this is a miniaturized version of that. It's a $350, 360 millimeter cooler. So we need a large case to put that in, and it's a large screen, so these things go together. We wouldn't want a large screen inside of a small case. Then it sort of detracts from the rest of your build. So getting the parts set up correctly for the right aesthetic is critical in building computers today, if that's an important thing to you, as it is for a lot of consumers. Now, businesses won't be having any of this. This is complete nonsense. This is a consumer-focused type of technology. And what's fascinating to me, having started in this business back in the early 1990s, 1991 to be precise, most consumers were wanting what businesses had. That's what the consumers wanted. And then over the course of the last 30 years, the consumers have wanted ridiculous, overpriced LED lighting and special effects, and not so much a computer to get any work done. What they want is a showpiece and something a lot of them want to game on. And so there's a lot of money to be made if you're a manufacturer, and you've got a consumer that's willing to pay more for things they don't need. That is money in the bank all day. So as the consumers started moving away from business requirements, then the next thing that happened is consumers, first of all, it's very expensive, all right? It creates all kinds of weird problems, oftentimes that you have to diagnose and figure out, why am I getting a blue screen? Oh, it's my RGB software. Why are my RGB lights not lighting up? It creates all kinds of problems that businesses aren't going to spend the money and the time to deal with. So consumers went down that path. Businesses kept on the straight and narrow, which is where they've always been. Consumers decided that was a good path at first, but veered off, and they've almost gone completely the opposite direction of business. Like now it's two separate entire types of businesses. So as a technician, what consumers want and the type of technical assistance consumers need has changed. But what businesses want and the type of technical assistance businesses need has been the same for 30 years. Minus, the new technology and, of course, advancing education on how to configure that. The goal is always the same in business, and the consumer's goal keeps changing. Now the consumers have gotten burned out. Consumers are fickle. The mood is coming down. It's reached its peak and it's coming down. As a result, sales have dipped. Consumers have given up. They're out of money. They're out of patience over silly nonsense that they realize doesn't make any sense, and they can't afford to keep up with it. So a lot of consumers have switched over to smartphones, tablets. If you are not creating something with a computer, with a PC, you don't generally need a PC. A PC is a device for creating. Now you can also consume with it, but there's a reason why we call them consumers. You understand what the word consumers means, right? There's the farmer with the cow and the chickens, and then there are the consumers who are consuming little bits of that, not an entire thing, right? So the point I'm trying to make to you is no matter how we look at the world, we're always seeing the same things in different categories. So whether we're talking about cars, and we look at like the typical business car, police cars, cars used in the line of business, and depending on what that business is, it could be a bus, it could be a minivan. And then the cars that are for consumers that no business would ever own because they're impractical, they can be overly expensive, and have more maintenance cost. So we have practicality versus emotional decision making, and based on the budget of the individual and how much they emotionally want something. In business, we don't buy things for emotion. We buy things to get a return on our investment, to make money. Consumers, on the other hand, spend money. If you go to work every day and you earn money, but you've never invested in your life, you've never learned how to make your money work for you. That's what investors do. Investors put their money into stocks, into funds, and then the consumers go to work and do all the actual work, and the investors sit in their chairs and smoke their cigars and drink their wine, and their money grows far greater in many cases, and certainly potentially, than the amount of money you'll make in your entire lifetime working 40 plus hours a week under the stress and drama of going back and forth to work in rush hour and dealing with coworkers and dealing with management and being laid off. They're immune from all this. They're letting their money work for them and create money for them. When you learn that trick, when you learn how to take a few extra dollars, and I'm not talking about a savings account, there's always a risk with investment. But there are a variety of investments you can make, a little of this, a little of that. And what's interesting is usually when some investment's going really well, nobody talks about it. They'll talk about when it's going bad. So let's say, for example, you invested $10 in Bitcoin 20 years ago. Bitcoin's over $10,000 right now per coin, when it was worth nickels and dimes. Now, it didn't happen overnight, but if your plan is you're working your whole life anyway, or you're working until typical retirement age, that's enough time. If you invest a little bit, leave it alone and ignore it, overall, as long as whatever you invested in doesn't go into business, including inflation and compounded interest, you're likely going to have quite a return if you can learn to leave it. That's the trick, to be able to walk away. You look at somebody like Warren Buffett and his understanding of compound interest. I seriously doubt somebody like Warren Buffett has an RGB over-the-top showpiece computer. He doesn't have any appeal for somebody like that. How does that give him better investments? How does that return more money into his pocket? It doesn't. He's just spending more, and it's something consumers will always do. And no matter how many times it's been told, and the consumers go, oh yeah, I should probably do that, most of them never will. They will just continue to be drones, go to work, earn the money just enough to get by, and do the same thing the next week, and then claim they don't have any money to invest when it doesn't take much, and it adds up. If it's $10 a week, that adds up to, hundreds after a year. And whatever you're investing in, and assuming you invest in multiple things, After 10, 20 years, that can make a massive difference for money you might have just blown on something and long since forgot that was an emotional purchase and nothing you needed. So it's not a real big sacrifice. But people will make their beds, and those people will lie in the beds they made. Bitcoin is projected to hit $1 million within the next 2 to 3 years. Now, those projections could be completely wrong. And I wouldn't be buying it at its peak price either. But it goes up and it goes down. And I'm using Bitcoin just as an example because it's one thing I know about. When it comes to other stocks and such, things like Tesla, prices are really down. But that's likely going to come back again. I don't know when. But other companies that have never gone public, like SpaceX, when they go public, hold on to your butts, because what it appears to be at first may be quite expensive, and you can't really tell any more than the cost of a gallon of gasoline. Is that price going to be more tomorrow or less tomorrow? And what about a year from now? And we've seen some great fluctuations from cheap prices to expensive prices in fuel. Barrels of oil, you invest in barrels of oil. When it goes down, it always goes back up. Anyway, buying an RGB gaming computer, my point is, that's going to go obsolete within a couple of years and create all kinds of potential technical support issues that you would not have had you not spent the extra money for the unnecessary glitter. You could have taken that same amount of money you would have spent on impractical nonsense and invested that into, let's just say, Bitcoin. Whenever you bought your computer 2-3 years ago, and maybe it's $100. Well, that $100 today would probably be worth about $300. So I just want you to think about that. Unless you have an abundance of cash that you can just burn through without it affecting your lifestyle, and you're willing to tolerate the added cable management, the added software updates, firmware updates, going to the RGB controllers, messing with the RGB software, and then every single time there's an update to Windows or other applications, the potential for that to create a conflict. If that's all worth it to you, I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm telling you to be prepared. And if you're considering becoming a computer technician, the work is in business. Consumers are fickle. They're interested in something today, they're not interested in it tomorrow. So your business could do really, really well on the consumer side for a short period of time, and then good luck finding enough work to keep you in business. But businesses have a consistent requirement, time after time, day after day. They need to upgrade. They don't have a choice. They're not going to whine about Windows 10 or 11. It's just not going to happen. They can't afford to. There's too much at stake to let personal, emotional feelings get in the way of business. If you do, you probably won't have a business very long. You can have a business based on emotion. I just don't know how sustainable it is. So as a tech, if you want regular incoming work where you're not constantly having to knock on doors finding new clients, you focus on business. And that, as long as that business stays in business, and furthermore, if that business grows, then the demands on you when you're already their technician, as they grow, you grow. And again, you don't put all your eggs in one basket either. I don't just want one client that's going to keep me busy 40 hours a week, because what happens if that client goes out of business? Then I go out of business too. So I have to be careful that I don't assign or allow a customer to monopolize my time, which I never have really that issue with a consumer. They might monopolize my day. They might call me with endless tech support that they think they don't have to pay for because they think it's tech support when it's tutoring. None of these issues happen on business. Very, very rare would something like that come up. So the system we're building today is very much a consumer-based system. Spending $350 on a cooler because it's got a 3D screen is an emotional purchase. It's not a logical, practical, pragmatic purchase. We have a Generation 5 T700. There may be a business use case for this, but probably not. This is also pretty much an emotional, psychological purchase. We have the Intel Ultra 7 CPU. Now the CPU is actually a sound purchase because the Ultra 9 is only this much faster, but that much more expensive. Doesn't make any sense. Unless you have a business need that increases your productivity to justify the added cost, this is the better value. For our motherboard, again, this is more of an emotional purchase, not a practical one. We're looking at all the pretty colors and the design, and it's meant to be seen, not tucked away. So there's going to be some part of this that is more expensive, and that we could build an identical machine that performs in the exact same way and probably spend, I mean, just the cooler alone, we could save $200 to $300 on the cooler, which comes off the cost of this build. If we look for other motherboards that are business-based, they will likely be cheaper than this unless you need the I/O and the looks just happen to come with it. I do believe there are alternatives. The case we're looking at is a $200 computer case. Now, unless we're in a server room, we're likely not spending $200 on a computer case for our employees. When we have 5,000 employees, that's well outside of the budget. We won't be able to budget in what needs to go in the cases. We're not going to be putting in 1,200 watt power supplies unless we have a specific department within the business that requires that. But for the average employees going to work, that would be over the top, way too expensive, and a poor investment, since we're going to be replacing the computers regardless. We're not going to be talking about what we like or dislike about Windows. That is a consumer, there's a word for it. I can't think of the word for it. It is a luxury that a consumer can complain about how they like Windows 10 and they don't want to go to Windows 11. That's a luxury for you as a consumer. As a business, you'll use the tools that you're being paid to work with. We don't care if you like the tools. It's irrelevant. You either do the job you were hired and being paid to do, or leave. All right? So only consumers have the luxury of having an emotional baseline for their purchases. Hence, they are consuming. A business is creating. They're creating work. They are creating all the things the consumers purchase and complain about. And the more, this keeps getting separated into separate directions. I'm seeing this getting more and more disassociated. When they used to be, you know, when the IBM PC came out, it was the consumers primarily that bought them first. It was the hobbyists. And then at that time, as businesses started to adopt them, then the focus became from the manufacturers, how do we sell more to businesses? Because consumer might buy one, a business will buy dozens or hundreds or even thousands. And this is primarily coming from companies that were previously buying large, like IBM's System 34, System 36, these large mainframes where salesmen could make one heck of a commission selling one of these bad boys. And it required a team and a crane to get it installed. And it was a massive, massive investment. And then the way you would talk to that would often be through little terminals. And getting business to warm up to the idea that a little consumer-based PC could replace that was laughable to the businesses. But suddenly, with the development of software and the lower cost, it became clear that this was the future way for businesses. It was much cheaper, much easier to maintain, didn't require that level of specialist, and with software that you could customize, like QuickBooks, for example. You didn't necessarily need custom written payroll software anymore for the mainframe, written in some obscure language that only, you know, a certain small amount of the population would even know. In other words, nobody would be coming home to their home computer programming RPG2. Very few. Certainly, you'd be like, what the hell is that? You might be asking yourself that now. So then, what businesses wanted was pretty demanding, and the manufacturers wanted to make those sales, and they started providing business with exactly what businesses wanted. And that increased sales, and then PCs really started to take hold in businesses. Once like the first really viable game came out on a PC, which was never considered a gaming platform, I mean, besides like text adventures, that would be Castle Wolfenstein. And then suddenly, with that advent of that game and the invention of shareware, which was genius, they changed not only the use case scenario for the PC for consumers, but also the introduction of how that software is sold, which had never been done before. So Castle Wolfenstein was innovative on multiple levels and resulted in a lot of computer sales. And it's never looked back since, right? They keep developing more and more to the point where, you know, the games are hyper realistic. They're more similar to movie making now than they are to video game programming in the 1980s. And they've taken the arcade experience and brought it into the home where you can play at your leisure, and even built consoles that are effectively nothing more than basically a PC. Whether it's PlayStation or Xbox, it's just pretty much still a PC in there with a proprietary operating system. That's all it is. So what does tomorrow bring for consumers is anybody's guess. It's fickle. It'll change and rotate on a dime, all to make a nickel. But what businesses want has been consistent and will likely remain consistent so long as there are consumers. So you don't have to be on one side of the fence or the other, but it would be unwise and to think the other side of the fence doesn't exist or doesn't apply to you. It absolutely does apply to you. Whether you're a business, you need the consumers. Otherwise, you likely don't have a business. And if you're a consumer, you need the businesses, or you don't have anything to consume. You need each other. And what I'm doing today, and I want to be clear about this, is consumer-based computer building. It is not anything that any business customer I have would even accept for free in their offices. Absolutely not. They won't have it. On the other hand, there are consumers that will dream or not be able to sleep over the anxiety of trying to figure out a plan of how I can get one of those machines or build one myself, because the emotions are involved on the consumer side and the emotions are not involved on the business side. So that is something that wasn't, all I'm trying to point out is my observation on how it has broken away. The consumer side and business side used to be together, and the consumer side broke away, and the business side is making more money, and the consumers are paying not only with their cash but with their patience and the amount of troubles they have that businesses never have with their computers, because they don't buy all the unnecessary nonsense, but they love selling it. They love selling it. It's highly profitable. And whatever issues you have with your RGB, that's your problem, right? I mean, you can contact their support or whatever, but in many cases, it requires a constant updating. When your RGB stops working, you know, that can require a replacement. It's all repairs that are completely unnecessary to getting anything done. It's just an emotional thing. I want it red. I want it blue. This one LED isn't lighting up. I won't buy that computer because it has no LEDs on it. These are consumer-based attitudes, and so you got to play to your crowd. All right, know the room. And here on YouTube, it's mostly all consumers. There's not many businesses watching YouTube. They have IT departments that take care of all this stuff for them. So for me to sit here and harp on and on and on about business to a consumer crowd, I'm probably talking to a big wall. And the only sense of vindication I get is when I talk to other technicians that are like, finally, you know, somebody on YouTube is talking about what is essentially the other half of the world, as though other channels don't even acknowledge it, as though it doesn't exist. It does exist, and it's very, very lively. And if you're truly an enthusiast, if you're truly into this stuff, why wouldn't you want to work as a tech? Like for me, that's the best way to get a bunch of experience, not just with my computer, but with a series of computers and different makes and different models over a long period of time at a big scale where you're timed. You've got to get the work done with a certain average of time over, a week or a month. And it's encouraging you to be better, to learn, and to get promoted, to raise up in the company through hard work and skillful labor, which often, results in a raise. You make more money, you become more valuable. That doesn't happen in the consumer world, right? You fix somebody's computer, maybe you hear from them again, maybe you don't. And it doesn't matter how long it takes you. You're not going to get rewarded anymore. You're not going to get a bonus or a promotion in most cases. And if you do, it won't be significant compared to a regular raise or promotion that continues on indefinitely in a job that happens to stay single one time with an individual consumer. But that's just the way I see it. I want to share with you my perspective because I think some people that watch these videos have never worked. They've never had a corporate job, and they don't understand the other half of the world that they live in, and they're not even aware it exists. So for those people, I provide this information. Or some people, maybe they're retired and they were out of work. They were retired from work before all this started happening. And they don't realize how much it's changed if you've been out of the workforce for a while. So I'm here to bridge that gap and say, do you remember what this was like? Okay, but now it's like that with computers. And how much more businesses have become dependent on computers. It's mind-blowing if it's a world you're not even aware exists or have ever worked in. It's very, very different from what you see on YouTube. There are a couple of YouTube channels like Serve the Home that can give you a taste of what's going on in business, but you're looking at equipment that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's nothing you're going to buy. Even if you emotionally want it, you likely don't have $100,000 laying around to buy your own AI server rack that does your own large language models and such, that you would have no business case for owning it. But these companies sure do. And they don't just buy one of them. They buy them typically by the dozens. So, you're looking at multi-million-dollar investments, and the cost to operate those for electricity, the rent of the building, the security required in the building, and then the maintenance of the people that have to install it and maintain it is not only where your expenses stop, your expenses continue indefinitely until you retire the equipment. So the minute a new piece of equipment comes out that, say it's a new server rack with enough power in that one rack to replace 3 or 4 racks you've got now at a fraction of the cost, why wouldn't you? And that's going to continually happen. And so if you're working in that field, you will always have work. That's all I'm trying to say. As the equipment evolves, it becomes a better value. It requires less power and it takes less space. So now the building doesn't have to be as big, the electric bill won't be as high, the maintenance costs won't be as high because you don't have as much equipment that needs to be maintained. And the sooner a business invests in that, the sooner they start profiting from it. It's nothing they want to procrastinate. And for that reason, things are always happening in business IT. And it will likely be this way for the rest of my life anyway. And with consumers, well, we're into PCs today, but now we're into tablets tomorrow, and now we're into smartphones on Thursday. And who knows what's next? But you're still struggling to keep up, right, to stay on top. But your reward for the work you do is that you have to work harder to find the work. One business can keep you busy. But at one point, I had 450 home users, and I was barely making ends meet, because the 450 home users would only call me like once a year. So for 2 years, that's over 700 days, and I have 450 customers. I got a lot more days than I have customers. Customers, some of them will call twice in that 2-year period, most will not. It's a very difficult way to earn a living, and not to mention the frustration that you're dealing with all these different personalities. So some consumers you get along with and some you don't. Some will treat you with respect, some will not. When you're working, you know who your coworkers are. There's going to be some coworkers you like and some you don't, or bosses you like, but they're always there. They never change, or they very rarely change. Consumers are always different. Every day it's another consumer, right? If you want to focus on the consumer. And yet you're going to make less money overall, you're going to work harder, and you're going to have more challenging interactions as different people react differently to how you speak or what sort of expectation they uniquely all have that they're expecting from you as the tech. So it's not a defined standard as it would be in business, which makes working in business less stressful, believe it or not, more secure for requirements of, you know, getting paid, health insurance, vacation time, which you don't have on your own working with consumers, and just the regular expectation of how your day is going to go. Even if it's not going to go well, it likely isn't going to be filled with anything you didn't expect. With consumers, you never know from day to day. Could be a good day, could be a great customer, could be a nightmare of somebody who wants to pay you nothing, demand you do everything, and then leave you a negative review and want to curse you out because they're being unreasonable. So that's far more likely something you deal with on a daily basis when working with consumers. And yet here on YouTube, it is the majority of viewers that are consumers. People working don't have time to watch videos. So I want you to bear that in mind, that you can find other consumers making videos on YouTube more so than you can find working individuals in any product category, automotive mechanics, doctors, etc., etc. In any sort of career, there are a lot of enthusiasts and very few professionals. And on this channel, my goal is to provide the lack of information that I feel is missing here on YouTube, and that is from a professional perspective for those of you who want to take it more seriously. Now, that doesn't mean we can't have fun with it, and that's my intention today. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge this is not a practical build. This is an emotional build, and we're doing it for a showcase piece, something that we would put in a museum or something we would put on camera and show the world. It's not going to sit under your desk that nobody's ever going to see that doesn't personally know you. And that's a big difference. And the question is, which one is actually worth it? Is it worth it for you to buy your friends? Is it worth it for you to spend money to buy something that impresses other people, even if you don't know them, because that somehow makes you feel more accepted? If so, that's your choice. If you're a business, what's making you the most money? What's your best investment, return on investment? And at scale, when you multiply that times however many employees you have, how many customers you have, how does that earn you more money so your business can continue to grow and be more profitable, not only year after year, but every quarter after quarter? Investors want to see what your projected earnings are. And if your projected earnings are flat or going to fall, likely the investors sell their stocks and move out. They reinvest in something else. And if it wasn't difficult enough to run your business, now you have the challenge of just financing your recovery. So it's a very different set of goals. And I point that out because I cannot believe the sheer number of people leaving comments or in the chat room that are seemingly clueless to how the items they're buying came to be in existence. And it doesn't bother me that people buy it. What bothers me is they don't seem to understand that's not what everybody does. And the priorities behind businesses is not about how a machine looks. It's about how reliable the machine is, how safe it is, right? You can't have a machine that's ultra finicky, ultra fragile, or can hurt somebody, but it also has to be safe and secure in the sense that it has to be configurable to be protected from outside hacking. And a lot of that is IT department related, not so much hardware related. But we also can't have an employee bang their knee on it, cut their knee open, and then claim workman's comp because we decided to go with this sharp-edged case because it looks cool. It's just not going to happen. It never will happen because it doesn't make any sense. All right, so I think I'm pretty clear on that. And let me just take a quick look over here in the chat room because I haven't said hello to everybody yet today. scroll up here. What have I missed? Oh, I've missed a lot. Parker Morse and Eugene Hidalgo join us, along with Eddie Casanova, Mark Baggett, and Rick Lakes. Rick Lakes contributes $5 in Super Chat. Thank you, Rick. Dustin Fuller, John Paul Bacon, and David Graham say hello. Mark Gaines joins us, along with David Herzog and Scott. Sean Skinner says hello, and Ben Laird joins us from Scotland, along with our friend Buster. Peter Laycock also joining us from Scotland. Buster contributes £10. He says, hello, Carey and Mara, everyone in the chat. All the best from Bonnie, Scotland. The temperature in Edinburgh is 55 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 12.7 degrees Celsius for the rest of the world. It's a little chilly. I'll take it. 100 degrees Fahrenheit here today, and it'll be getting hotter. Lucky me. But, you know, I do live in a desert. So if you don't like the heat, get out of the desert. Let's see. Marsman50 says hello. There's Doman2000 joining us, along with Phil Stodd, Luke Greenia, and Richard DeFries. I also see Andy W6AD and David. Did I mention David Herzog saying hello? There's also who? Ghostly Lurker. And I am trying to get through this quickly. Dazzle555. Nicholas Barlow. Phil Stodd. Frank Jimmy. Essential Working Too Hard. Oh, we got a nice, good, full chat room today. Todd Wickham. Scott Lismore. Said he just built a computer today in a Corsair 200R, and it was easy and fun. But clearly he wasn't working on any RGB on that build, because there's no glass on that. That is a business case. Steve mentions he's been watching me since 2014. Well, thank you. Appreciate that you've been a viewer that long. Thomas Backenstow said, there's a great lesson, Carey. Katrina H. joins us. And I also see Jack Kugelmus saying hello. 3D Everything and John Kennedy. John Kennedy says, but we like to complain about Windows, Carey. And your complaints do absolutely nothing. It has no impact on the world around you. But you keep doing that, because clearly it's worth it. And I know he's kidding, but so am I. Like, seriously, what are you going to do? Poorly Boy says hello and joins us. John Kennedy says, people like to complain in general about everything, me included. Hey, look, I do too, but I also feel like I am hopeful that in that complaint, when I'm talking to manufacturers who are watching my reviews, that I'm assisting them to make the product better, in my opinion. So it's not just shouting at clouds, basically, which I guess some people enjoy doing that. I'm just not sure what good it does. It might be therapy for people to go outside and shout at clouds. But with so many people doing it, it's getting a bit noisy, and it's not really accomplishing anything for anybody but themselves. It's kind of a selfish thing. But yeah, I understand. And again, in business, it's a different scenario. In business, we might complain about things that are actual things we can change versus complaining about something we can't. But it just depends on, you know, there's always exceptions. There's no absolutes, but it's just typically more found on the consumer side, where they're complaining about things where the consumer has the option to simply not use the thing they're complaining about. The consumers will make it sound like they're being force-fed when they're making a voluntary choice, and then they're openly complaining to the internet about how bad their choices are. I mean, make better choices. It's a real easy solution. If you don't like Windows, stop using it. No one's forcing you to use that. But when you go to work and your office is using Windows or Linux or Mac, that's what you're paid to do. So you can quit your job. You don't have an indentured servitude. If you dislike your job or you dislike the tools they're requiring you to use, It may not be the right line of work for you, or the right employer is not a good fit. You know, that employer is not a good fit for you. But you're in charge of that. That's why I have a hard time wrapping my mind around this whole idea that it's getting anything done. It's not changing anything. Only you can change it for you, and nobody's holding you back. So sitting there complaining about it isn't fixing it. It will not get it fixed, and people don't necessarily agree with your complaint. So do what you need to do, such as move away from Windows. It's not for you. You're not going to ever make it for you. So it's just trying to force a square peg into a round hole and somehow believing you can actually get that done. You're not. You will not. Now, you can do that just for you, but you can't do it for the world in general. Not unless you're running your own company with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees and have some influence. As a consumer, you do not have any influence at all. Sure, people think they do. Oh, we're going to go on Twitter, we're going to go on social media, and we're going to complain about this. But very rarely does that ever make any difference at all. Because at the end of the day, it's if the company's profitable. That's it. And consumers are generally not the focus of business in the sense of it depends on the business, but a lot of times a consumer buys one thing one time. You know, if there's something about Walmart you don't like, too bad. You know, Walmart's got way too many people coming and going through the doors. They might be repeat loyal customers. They might be first-time shoppers. Walmart doesn't know. They don't track it. They don't have loyalty cards. They don't care. We're dealing on a big scale of a mountain filled with ants, a mountain of ants. And we're all just little ants in that mountain. And we're shouting, but you can't be heard, nor does anybody really care, because there's so many more ants to focus on that are, you know, in the process of making a purchase, or where our focus and attention needs to be on completing a sale or a service. Once that sale and service is done, we move on to the next one, and it's done at a great scale where each of us individually don't have much of a voice. And even when we all group together on the internet and believe we have a voice, in many cases, it really doesn't make any difference. I think it's, again, more of a therapy. It's more psychological. And again, that doesn't really work in businesses. It's just not how things get done. When you're part of the board of directors, or you're part of a management group that's just the decision makers, that's who the business listens to. And even then, they often don't get listened to. Trust me, just because you're a decision maker doesn't mean you get your decisions. You have to argue with other decision makers and their decisions. And then that goes up another tier. And then you basically have to convince the actual decision makers, the real ones who can approve or deny the request. And sometimes you got to repeat that multiple times before you can get through. It requires patience, and it requires tenacity, but it also requires a level of influence. And if you don't have that, it's just noise. It's just a dog barking outside in the yard. It's just really annoying, and it doesn't really do anything. Sometimes it may do a little bit. Maybe it deters a burglar. Maybe, maybe not. So that's how I see it anyway. Thomas MacT says hello, and Gary Tatum joins us along with Evie Miller. And let's see. Trying to catch up here. David Graham with a $2 super chat says, thank you for helping me. You're the best. I guess David Graham had a networking issue, and that was Mara who helped you, David. And glad to hear you got that resolved. Thank you for your super chat. Hey, Frankie B joins us in the chat. Right on. Bryce Hosking also says hello from New Zealand. All right. Shall we get some work done today? It's been 49 minutes and I haven't started the job yet. This happens in the real world too. You show up to work, you get your cup of coffee. Who goes to work and starts working right away? All right, so I'm going to just slide this over here. Now, last night I fired up this motherboard and updated its BIOS and did all the Windows updates. There is I think there's a link in the video notes today that goes over all these parts, because we did prep this on camera. This is the ASRock Z890 LiveMixer Wi-Fi, And these LiveMixer boards have a ton of USB on them, which is what I really like. Having Wi-Fi on a full-size ATX board is less common than on a micro ATX board. And it's darn near, if not mandatory, on a mini ATX board. So it's not as common to find that. And I thought, I don't really need it. But on the other hand, I may not be the person that ends up with this. This may be sold to a consumer at some point. The cooler we put on here is Intel's Luminar cooler that I intend to remove and replace with a liquid cooler. This was just put on for testing, just to make sure we can get Windows installed, Windows 11 Pro activated, drivers, make sure our Gen 5 T700 is running at around 12,400 megabytes per second, as it should. And I just wanted to verify last night when I hooked this up that it's up to date, because it's been off for a couple of months. And we're finally able to get back to both this board and that case at the time, because I don't really do much research. I just go, okay, I want that, and I want that, and I want that. I'm accustomed to more, again, of the business world, where you don't have to worry about fitment issues. Usually, you buy whatever you want and put it in the case. But the minute we start dealing with liquid coolers and RGB, you need to have a larger case with larger cable management. And so I ended up making a decision that I had to undo. None of the parts I bought were bad parts. It's just they weren't meshed well together. And so I had an opportunity to correct that. And I said, okay, these big MSI Meg boards, even though they should have fit in this case, in reality, they don't fit very well. I could have made it work, but I have higher standards than that. So I went back to the drawing board to find a case specifically for that board. And in the meantime, with the ProArt build that seemed much more aligned to the business needs that Mara has, that opportunity came in and we had a need for it. So that machine is what Mara uses every day. Although she does like RGB and she sacrificed it for the build, she is sacrificing it for performance, for reliability, because you don't have to deal with all the RGB software that could potentially causes problems. So again, rewinding that, if you will, and reassociating the parts to different builds. Sometimes I do that because I'm still of the world where if the case I buy says it holds an extended ATX board, I expect it's going to hold it well. But these days, just because it says it can hold it, don't assume it'll hold it well. But sometimes the only way you can find out is to just try it. And as a business, as a small business, I can afford to move items around and play musical chairs to get the best aesthetic and fit. Even if it means I have to build something halfway, 3/4 of the way, realize this is getting worse before I stop and say, okay, let's just take it all apart. These are not good parts that go together. You as a consumer can take more time than I have to do more research to make sure that the parts you're building do go together. And a great way to do that is not PC Part Picker. Because PC Part Picker will tell you what parts go together, but not necessarily how well. The best way is you see a build on YouTube, and particularly with a motherboard, a power supply, and a case. Then feel free to add what you want, assuming, if you want a large cooler, that the build you're watching on YouTube perhaps uses a different cooler, but of the same size. You can make those changes and not have to worry about fitment issues in most cases. That takes a lot of the time and research out of it. If you can just modify what somebody else has done very minorly. And specifically what you want to pay attention to, most important, is how the board fits in the case, and whatever cooler you want will fit in that case, right? Depending on if it's a liquid cooler, if it's an air cooler, how deep it is, how deep the case is. Once you've established those three parts are going to be okay, at that point you can choose whatever CPU you want, whatever RAM you want, whatever storage you want, et cetera, et cetera. That makes it so much easier. I'm trying to create original content. I don't want to take what somebody else has done and modify it. So for me, I don't allow myself to be influenced by what some other content creator has done for the most part. Sometimes I do get a spark of inspiration from other folks' videos. Nothing wrong with that. But I don't want to make that a habit of just constantly taking other people's ideas and then putting my twist on them. I'd rather just come out with something completely fresh for me. And I also think it offers the viewers a better variety of content and a good reason to come check out my channel if you don't want to see what everybody else has already done. I guarantee you there's no build like this online. Just doesn't exist. This combination of parts is uniquely me, for better or for worse. So what I need to do is just make a little room here to catch you up. I ended up taking all of the parts that we were putting into this Cougar case, completely remove them except for the power supply. So let me bring the case up onto our turntable here. And I have like the spare power supply cables. We've left the power supply in there, as I mentioned. We've got our documentation, which we'll need. We have, this is for the documentation for the case. This is documentation for the power supply. These are all the screws that came with the case. You need to keep the screws. I guess I had removed a couple of these PCIe. I like these all to match. So I might need these again, or whoever buys it might need it again. So I like to hold on to those. And this is an RGB header that goes to something that I don't know what this goes to anymore. This would not typically be a part of the case, but maybe it is, because it does have built-in RGB fans, which would imply it's got an RGB fan controller on it. So I'm not sure if this goes with the case or not. This is the one part I'm not sure of, and I'm not missing it that I'm aware of, so I don't know where that goes yet. But I've left the panels off the case. I mean, there's no sense putting it back together just for me to open it back up. And we'll put this back up here, and I think you will recognize it. Oh, I did put the glass back on the side just because I didn't want to damage the glass. And we had a video card in here. I'll probably put those PCIe slot covers back in. I don't know if I'm putting a video card in this or not. Or back in this, I should say. And we've got a little bit of dust on it from sitting here. And doing all this renovation work is not helping to keep dust down. And I just use a dry microfiber cloth, right? Super easy to keep your computer clean. You don't want to use any chemicals on it. If you have something you're trying to get off that's not dust, something that requires a little scrubbing, just water, microfiber and water. The other thing with paper towels, they scratch. So if you're cleaning glass or cleaning a monitor, you want to use something that isn't going to scratch up the paint or scratch up the anti-glare coating. You don't want to use any alcohol-based cleaners unless you're trying to get off like a sticky residue or something. And even then, you should test a small spot before you go whole hog on the and destroy your paint. And then on this side, yeah, there's our fan controller, but it looks like all the connectors are on there. So this might have gone to the liquid cooler we had in there. I don't know where that went. We did have a number of different fan controllers because of all the RGB. It added a ton of wiring for like the power RGB. The Leon Lee Strimer has its own power. The liquid cooler had its own fan controller. The case had its own fan controller. It's a big, hairy mess of cables, and it looked terrible because it was so overcrowded. All right, so this is what it looks like when it's empty. Look how crowded it is. And they don't show you this in the product marketing photos. And cable management in this isn't great. So if we just build a traditional computer in this with a liquid cooler and we don't try to go over the top with unnecessary RGB, just use what it has, less is more. You'll end up with a cleaner, much nicer, more elegant looking system without as many potential future points of failure. And it'll cost you less money and be less frustrating to hook it all up or to even work on it in the future when you've got to, you know, stick your hand into a nest of cables to figure out what's going where and what's going wrong. That just adds to the challenge. If you like that kind of challenge, you know, have at it. Start without me if I'm not there. Now I'm trying to remember how all this comes apart. And I want to say this front glass comes off. I think it just pulls, doesn't it? I'm trying to remember if I have to take the top off. Not sure. Let's start with this back panel right here. And I want to just make sure that you guys can see. So this back panel there's a little lip here, and I think I just pull on that. Yeah. And then that just comes off. It's just a straight panel that lifts off and clips in at the top. Now there are two, is it two or just one? Sometimes on some cases you'll have a panel here, and then you'll have a panel over here. This one looks like a bent piece of glass. This is a pretty expensive thing to manufacture, and it's probably a good portion of why this case is $200. The cost of manufacturing that specific, very specific piece of glass, which to the best of my knowledge is not shared among manufacturers or any other case from the same. In other words, it is a proprietary part made specifically and only for this case. So good luck finding one if you break one. But it's also quite elegant in that it's one piece, and that's going to cost more. The fans that we have in here, these fans here and here, also came with the case, and that also adds to the price of the case because they're not only fans, they're RGB fans. And they're not only RGB fans, they have a fan controller. All this adds to the price of the case. Then we have our lit up stage here that will spin that we can put a little figurine on. And of course, I'm keeping all that out for now because I need room to work. And as we complete the job, then we can start worrying about applying the aesthetic portions of things. And my main goal today is simply get the board installed, hook the power supply up, and get it fired up. Any sort of cable management or elegance of aesthetic, that can be done off camera. It's a very boring thing to watch because a lot of it you can't see anyway, right? I have to be right there looking right at it. So either the computer's facing me and you're looking at the back, or if I put the computer behind me, I'm in the way of you seeing, because in order for me to do the job, I need my hands on the equipment. And if my hands are bigger than what I'm working with, like cables, the camera's only going to see my hands. So it doesn't benefit the viewer in any way. Now there are ways to, you know, manually operate a camera and work around all that. And then everything's dark inside the case, so you got to provide additional lighting. And then it's difficult to rely on autofocus because it might want to autofocus on the back of my hand. So then you got to control the focus manually. And you've taken a difficult job and you've made it 4 times more difficult because you want to make a video. I'm all for it. You should absolutely do that. Me? Not so much. We have done that before, by the way. We do have videos showcasing all the little details. This glass panel also comes off where you pop it away from the top, but you also have to get the side popped out too, and then lift it straight up, and we'll set that aside. And that's going to make it a lot easier to work inside the case. All right, let's put that down there. So now, as you can see, this is a pretty easy case to work on. Now, as I mentioned, if you didn't watch when we initially unboxed this case, it came with a fan down here, which only works in this case. And separately, you can buy this little spinning platform that lights up. This is an additional cost. This does not come with a $200 case. This is like another $40, something like that. And basically, there's no wires or anything. It just simply pops out, and it's got a connection that it makes when you slide it in. So the connection's down here at the bottom. And basically, you just pop out the fan. You just push down in this little indent right there, and it lifts out, and then you get your accessory, highly profitable accessory that does nothing physically to enhance your performance, security, or reliability. It's simply an emotional purchase because it looks cool, and that just pops in real easy. And it's already hooking up the electrical connections automatically when you do that. I mean, I really appreciate that. This kind of swapping in and out of parts is traditionally what we see in business computers. They're often much better built. They are more expensive. They're often made of better materials, and they're designed so an IT department can get in and out of hundreds of computers weekly, if not daily, depending on the size of the company. I mean, just Google how many employees Intel has, or how many employees Microsoft has, or just pick any large corporation, Ford Motor Company, and Google how many employees they have worldwide. You know, Intel has campuses in Ireland and Israel, here in Arizona and Santa Clara, California, all over the world. And each of those campuses is probably 5,000 to 10,000 people. It adds up real quick, and everybody needs a computer. All the engineers, all the customer service, the front desk receptionist, everybody needs a computer, and those computers have to be updated and maintained. And it's not something you're going to do on a whim. You have full-time staff, not just one. You'll have a multiple team of full-time staff we call the IT department that handle in-house, and then you'll have another IT staff that handles sort of all of the public-facing websites and driver development, research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's thousands, tens of thousands of employees. And so as you can imagine, being able to make sure that those employees can all do their job and that their tools are functioning right, that's costing the company money. So we're trying to figure out a way to make money with spending as little as possible. And I really enjoy working in the corporate environment, even though the politics and bureaucracy are the worst part of it. The amount of work and the challenge of it is so enjoyable for me. But I also like doing this stuff from time to time, but this is more mood-based type of work. Sometimes I'm just not in the mood. And with business, it's not mood-based. It's get to work. I don't care if you're in a good mood or not. You have a job to do. And it's one of my favorite lines from the book Dune that I read when I was a teenager, where essentially Gurney Halleck, who's he's like a bodyguard, and he's teaching the person that he's protecting how to protect himself if he's not around. And he says, it's time for your training. And this important, spoiled, entitled person says, I'm not in the mood for training today. And the guy says, mood? Mood is for lovemaking, not war. Defend yourself, and immediately attacks him, where the guy has no choice but to either be stabbed or defend himself. Mood doesn't play into it. This is mood-based, okay? And the work in business is war. I'm just saying. That line really spoke to me. I get it. And then when they're done with their little battle, he says, you weren't really going to stab me. He goes, oh yeah, I'd have given you a good scar to remind you. He was serious. This is not a joke. This is not a mood. You will defend yourself. And it doesn't matter if you like it or not. I just want to put those PCI slot covers back on. Thankfully, I was smart and put my thumb screws back where they belong, so I don't have to go looking for those. And what better place to put them than back in the mounting holes where they would traditionally hold something that I don't have holding anything, but at least I know where the screws are. So I just want to put this back because I don't have any plans right now to put a GPU in here. Now, initially, we were going to put Mara's, what did she have, a 3080 or something? And we ended up upgrading that. So we do have a 3080 just sitting here. We could change our mind and put it in here. The power supply is an 850 watt, Cougar branded, matches the case, and certainly more than enough to power any graphics card on the market. So we won't have to have any limitation regarding either what this case can hold, because it'll hold any graphics card on the market, or what the power supply can power, because it can power any graphics card on the market. We sort of over-purchased, at least for today's build. If I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't need an 850 watt power supply unless I was planning to put a GPU in it. And the power supply does not need to be made by the case manufacturer. I thought that it may make the installation easier, but it turns out in this particular parts list, it doesn't really make any difference. And I was going to also use the Cougar cooler, trying to make it like a Cougar-based build, thinking, here's the logic, if we use all the parts from the same manufacturer, they should all go together, right? However, they aren't all from the same era. So the cooler comes from a couple of years ago. In this case, is recently released. And those two things did go together, but were never really intended to mix, you know, this manufacturing component from a few years ago to the manufacturing components of today. Some manufacturers may maintain that backward compatibility, but even other like NZXT and Lian Li make coolers that don't fit in some cases if the cooler's not of the same era. And then one of the problems I had was with the new sockets, the old coolers don't fit on new CPU sockets without some kind of an adapter kit. And that adapter kit may be a standard or it may be proprietary. Then you got to wonder, with the cost of the adapter kit and the advancement in water blocks in the last 2 years alone, is it worth keeping an old cooler? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. I mean, it's, again, more all emotional based and not so much something we can sit down in a boardroom and explain to the board of directors we should repurpose these old components, because time is money, and even having that conversation is costing money. Just want to take a look here in the chat room real quick. Brian Madonna joins us, says hello. There's Jim KJ3N joining us, and William Lynn. Say hello. Welcome in, guys. Brad Revel joins us and says hello. Let us know where you're watching us from. What part of the world are you in? I'm always tickled by seeing the variety of cultures that we have joining us that all share this common interest. The cabling, you know, I basically, like, I've got an ARGB cable hanging out here for something. I don't know where it goes. I guess the fan controller. Again, these fans are RGB. This is RGB. This fan is RGB. That in and of itself is a lot of RGB. The motherboard has some RGB on it. The RAM has RGB on it. How much more do you need? Like, we were adding the Strimer cable with RGB, and the power cable to the graphics card was also RGB, and then that had a controller, and then the liquid cooler had RGB. It's like, what a cabling nightmare. And where a lot of RGB now will share the same ARGB connector, the older equipment is a lot of proprietary stuff. If you look at the cooler we installed on earlier this week, I repurposed an original NZXT Z3 cooler, which is a 280 millimeter liquid cooler that came from the original streamer build we did about 5 years ago. That's a $275 cooler, somewhere around there. And there's nothing wrong with it. So I wanted to repurpose it. It fits really well in the case it was originally in, and all I wanted to do was upgrade the components on the motherboard chip, CPU, modernize it, but that cooler would not fit on that socket type. So luckily I was able to find an adapter kit on Amazon, and otherwise I'd have to be buying a new cooler. That's going to add another $200 plus to the cost of the build. And then I got to take an experiment to wonder if it's going to fit right in the case. So for that build, as you recall, we left the power supply in, we left the cooler, and we reused the case with the cooler and power supply that were already in there. But we just wanted to put a brand new motherboard in there, which the cooler did not accommodate for. But there were adapter kits available. Sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it isn't. I don't know how much life that cooler has left in it. Could be another 5 years. The higher end, more expensive name brand liquid coolers do last longer on average than the cheaper, lesser known brands, but the technology keeps getting better. So how they built coolers a couple of years ago is pretty different to how they build coolers today. So bear that in mind. A lot of the old information that you have may no longer be applicable unless you're working with old hardware that they were talking about at that time. If you're dealing with new hardware, you need updated information, even if it's just to confirm nothing's changed. But I would not assume nothing's changed. Likely there's a reason the new hardware came out. Now, when I look at this board, one of the first things I notice is we have two mounting holes right next to each other in the middle of the board, and I despise that. That's a micro ATX standard. Now, apparently it's also a standard for ATX optionally, but not many manufacturers do that. But it's pretty rare, in my experience, to find a case that supports that additional standoff or mounting point. So in other words, we're used to getting 3 mounting points across the bottom, 3 across the top, 3 across the middle, and the middle center mounting point usually has a post to help align the board for you to secure all the other screws. That's a total of 8 or 9 screws, depending on if that post is got a screw thread in it. Some do, some don't. So now we're adding a 10th standoff, right? So we got to count out. That's the easiest way to tell. I have no idea what position these standoffs were in, if we moved any, or if it just came out of the box the way it is. But I am particularly concerned about that particular standoff. You don't have to use it, but I do, okay? I will use it. So let's just take a look here. I need 3 across the top. 1, 2, 3, and I can barely see them. I need 3 across the middle. 1, 2, 3. There is a hole right here. Keep losing my screen. Hold on a second. There is a hole, a mounting hole, right there that we need a standoff for. So this case will accommodate both, and since it will, we're definitely going to use it. So again, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. That is your standard ATX mount points, 9 of them. When you go micro ATX or mini ITX is always 4, 1 in each corner. And a mini ITX board in here will fit, but it'll look super silly. It'd be like me putting on a pair of size 13 shoes. Okay, it's got to be a little clown looking. You can do it though. If the case will hold a large motherboard, then it has no problem holding a smaller board. There might be some exceptions to that, but there's no physical reason why a smaller board won't fit in a larger case. The opposite is not true for obvious reasons called physics. But the point is, I need now, this is the time to put that standoff in rather than realizing it after we've got the board installed. So I'm going to look through all these little bags of screws, and I hope one of these has a spare standoff in it, which I am not finding yet. These look like little standoffs, but this little bag of screws are like little thumb screws for securing 2.5-inch drives. So that's not what we want. These look like motherboard mounting screws, which I would assume if there was a spare standoff, it would be included in that bag. These long screws that are 3/4 not threaded, that's a big shoulder, these are for installing a fan, and you've got to go through the fan to where it secures down, like from the front of the fan through it into the back of the case. That's what we're not doing any of that, so we will not need these screws. These screws here are for just regular fans that you would screw directly onto the top or back or bottom of the case. We're not adding any more fans. We don't need any screws from that. This is the little socket that you get for tightening or removing or relocating the standoffs if you don't have a 5mm socket. And so quite often I would keep any extra standoff with this socket, and it's not there. This is more screws. These are traditionally used either for mounting the motherboard or for 3.5-inch mechanical drives. And these are the finer thread screws that are often used. We used to use these on optical drives and things, and sometimes these are what's used to go into the standoff. It's hard to know from one manufacturer to another. That's the benefit, again, when you work in corporate America, you work on the same make and model of most of the equipment. So once you get to know which threaded screw is needed, it stays the same across the lineup. When you work on whatever rolls in, you have to pay attention and try them to see which ones work, or read the documentation, which, you know, I can't be bothered. So the downside is I don't appear to have any spare motherboard standoffs set aside. That tells me one of two things: the case did not include them, or I didn't put them back properly. And again, with all the equipment I have, it's critical that I put things back properly in order to avoid the very situation I'm in right now. However, I do have a lot of spare parts. You know, black standoff is a pretty common part, but that doesn't mean the thread in it will be the same on either the thread that goes into the motherboard tray or the screw that goes into it, or the height of the standoff will be the same. They could vary from one manufacturer to another, but there's often some overlap where they're not uniquely designing the standoffs themselves. Whatever standoff they're using matches the depth of the motherboard tray to where the I/O shield is, and the color of the case, which again isn't that important unless you're me, because the motherboard's going to cover it up anyway. So what I will do is just take one of these standoffs out, so I get a look at what thread, the depth of the thread, and how tall the standoff is. I can also verify what type of screw goes into it, because I don't want to use a different screw on one standoff. That's janky. You know, you're going to do something, let's make it look like a professional did it. And that's the way I would do it. So any of these, they're all the same on this case. So we'll just take one out here and just get an idea. Just by looking at it, I don't need any measuring tools. I just want to get an idea of digging through my spare parts of what I'm looking for on that little standoff. It has a very short coarse thread on the end, and on this end, I don't know yet if it takes a fine thread or a coarse thread screw, because we do have plenty of both, and I don't know why I don't have a spare standoff. That, I'm pretty sure the case came with a 10th one, especially a $200 case, but apparently either it didn't include it or I didn't put it back properly. Now I'm looking at these screws here and they're catching my eye because I see some paint rubbed off. That makes me think I've used these in something. So likely what I would have used them on is holding the board in. Now granted, I could have also taken a Sharpie marker and written on the Ziploc bag, but I also know I'll figure it out. Like, it's not rocket science to take a standoff and a screw and see if they go together. If the thread is, if this requires a coarse thread screw, it won't even get started. If this requires a thin thread screw, which it does, and it's tightening, but I try putting a coarse thread in there, well, that's what I already said, it won't even go in. If it's the other way around, and we're putting a fine threaded screw into a coarse threaded standoff, then it'll start to screw in, and you might think, hey, I think that's right, but it'll never tighten. It'll start to go sideways on you. It's just loose. So this does appear to be, and again, I was just looking at some of the paint rubbed off on these. So I'm right, these were used for the motherboard. So now that I know which type of screw the standoff requires, I know how tall the standoff is, and I know the depth and the coarse or fine thread on this end of the standoff, I can now go to my spare parts jar, which is not organized at all because, quite frankly, it's not a 5-gallon bucket. It's just a little ramekin. It probably has 300 screws in it. And it won't be that difficult to search through this compared to the amount of time it would take me to organize and separate. I mean, OCD is one thing, but that level of OCD is something else. Now, if this was something I did every day, it'd probably be worth my time to organize it so I can immediately get what I need. These are some motherboard standards that come from a 200R, and as you can tell from the bag, this is 3 times larger. So these are not interchangeable. Your motherboard will be tweaked if you were to force that in there. It may work, but it's going to look terrible. Someone's going to look at this and go, clearly, whoever built this had no idea what they were doing or just simply didn't care. And if that's the vibe you want to give off, you know, don't let me get in your way. And what I'm looking for in here, the rest of this is just loose screws. And I've got fan screws and case screws and silver screws and black screws. I've got case screws and I've got motherboard screws. I've got 3.5-inch drive screws, and I should have some standoffs in here. In fact, I just found one, but this standoff is also too tall. It might work though. It actually might work. So let me just bring it up to the camera close and I'll show you what I'm talking about. This is why it's so important you use all the same standoffs on your cases and don't mix them. So here's the original standoff right there. And here's the first one I found in my jar. And you can see, let's see if I line them up here. What we're concerned about is it's okay if this screws a little longer, right? Because if that screws all the way down into the motherboard tray, what sticks up is what's important. And will they be the same height once they're flush with the motherboard tray? And it does look like they are. Then my second concern, you see what a pain in the butt this is will a fine threaded screw tighten in here, or do I have to use a coarse threaded screw? Because I don't have to want to separate out different screws. First of all, the head of the screw is going to look funny when it doesn't match all the others. You're not going to buy a computer from HP or Dell or any professional organization that mixes colors and styles of screws. So we want this to look professional, like somebody who knew what they were doing did it. And then I want to use the same fine threaded screw that we were just testing to see if it does secure in there. If not, I'm going to go back into my little RAM again and dig around some more. And then I also have other areas of little Ziploc bags of spare standoffs from random cases for some reason or another I still have. Sometimes when I'm dismantling and retiring a computer, I will break it down, send it to the recycling center, but keep the standoffs and screws for just such an occasion. There's a method to my madness. But this ramekin exists differently because this is on a whim. I'm in the middle of working on something. I don't need these screws. Where do I put them right now? They go in the ramekin. When the ramekin starts getting full, and it does, at some point I need to set some time aside to kind of work through some of that and give me some more future room to add to. Yeah, so this screw, this is a prime example of what I was trying to describe. When I try to put a fine threaded screw into a coarse threaded standoff, it just goes inside. I can wiggle it and push it. Look how far in it's gone. And there's no way to tighten it. This needs a coarse screw. So this standoff will not work, even though it meets the requirement going into the tray and it meets the height requirement for the motherboard to meet the I/O shield cutout. It does not meet the requirement for the mounting screw type. What a pain in the butt, because manufacturers have not decided on a standard. And I don't want to put that back in the jar because what are the odds I'm going to find it again and go through the whole thing all over again. So we'll keep that out. We'll put it back when we're done and see what other ones we have in here. I'm hopeful that the extra one, if it came with an extra standoff, ended up in this jar. Otherwise, I don't know that we ever got one or that I put it back where it belongs. So I'm going to just keep looking. Bear with me for a second. No. Nope. Oh. Nope. That's this looks like a twin. Nope, it's a twin. Wherever those came from, they were together. What else? What else do we have here? Oh, just found one. Let's see. Let's go here. Well, this one might be promising. Nope. These are all coarse thread. If I turn out that I've got 10 of these, I could just pull the 9 out I've got now. Even though they weren't designed for the case, they're pretty darn close. So let me just set that there and just keep looking. I may end up having to go to another different stash to identify where these standoffs are. You know, I've only found 3 in this whole ramekin, and I'd swear I had like 20 in here. So I don't remember if I had separated them out at some point. I don't remember doing it, but I do remember the ramekin getting full and me, you know, isolating some of the screws out of it. But that's why I say I've got 2 separate locations, and this is just the quickest one for me to get to. And it'll always be my first, even when I'm not doing a live, I will, you know, a live video. I will go here first, try and find what I need. And I am not having much luck. I'm just finding 3 in here. Now, another thing that we can do is we can use a nylon standoff. I just plug it into the board. It's just, I know I have these, and it's just a shame to have them sitting. It's also a shame that if I did get a spare, that it did not go back in the bags of extra screws. So we can make this work. You could also just ignore that hole altogether. But again, I want it to look professional. And if you buy a machine from Dell or HP or any of the other professional makers, they're not going to have any screws missing. So they must be pretty important, even if you don't think so. Sometimes when you work a job, you're required to do some work that is something that may not make sense to you, but you're getting paid to do it, and it's not your job to question the process. And I kind of follow that line of reasoning when it comes to whether or not you need a screw. I go, well, what do the big guys do? What does Dell and HP do? Do they skip out screws because they're not needed? Because that'll add up real quick if they save one screw on 300 million computers. Wouldn't they? I'm giving up on this now because it doesn't appear that I have that standoff, which bums me out. It also bums me out that ASRock added that extra hole because it creates this additional complexity in getting the board installed.
You got the wrong screen on.
I have the wrong screen?
Yeah.
When did that happen? How long has it been?
You can answer that.
How long has it been that way?
About 5 minutes.
Is it really that long?
Yeah.
Well, there you guys go. I don't know.
At first thought it was on purpose, but I was like, I'm like, oh, I guess that's not on purpose.
Well, I've been monitoring the screen too, but I've had my head down looking in this jar looking in the ramekin. Yeah. Well, there you go. You can all pretend to be producers and see our connection status, our drop frame rate. That's behind the scenes what we look at over here. Okay, so that's my jar, and let's see, just in case I had any extra place somewhere else. Sometimes you can look around the back of the board and just see where the screws are coming out. It'd be easier to see. Not on this board. No, they barely come out at all because the length of the screw coming out of the standoff is so shallow. Rats. It's a very minor thing, but it's the minor things that differentiate a good job from a great job. All right, there's a lot of people that'll be very quick to dismiss this as unimportant, and those are not the kind of people I would ever hire. I want people to care, and I want people to do the best, most professional job they can, not rush through it, and it's an expression we call half-ass. I'm not interested in that. Anybody can do that. It doesn't require any skill. Finding the kind of person that cares enough to look at the details is so rare that just because somebody in comments, which I'm not even looking at, but I'm assuming are saying, why is he spending so much time on something that's unnecessary? They are completely wrong. They have a different value system than I have. And I respect the value of my customers' time and money, or I want to make sure they are getting exactly the same or better than quality than they would if they went to a competitor. So these are the details, and you will have customers in this business that will pay attention to that. I guarantee it. Well, most may not. The ones that do are often the customers that are the most valuable to you. So again, these standoffs, these really tall ones, these went to a Corsair 200R. I think they were in the bag, or in the ramekin. I think that was in the ramekin. Was all this? Okay, so just to get on with the build, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that extra mounting hole. Gigabyte used to do that to me all the time, and I guess now ASRock's going on my list. So let me find my little bag of nylon standoffs, because I'm still not going to just leave that hole empty, even though many of you will say you totally can. I cannot. You can. I can't. I just want to emphasize that. Somewhere in here, I have a bag. Here it is. We used to use these little nylon standoffs in the 90s. This is how you used to mount a board. You'd only have 1 or 2 screws that hold the board in, and the rest of the board was held in with these standoffs. They've even yellowed from age. That's how old they are. And I've always kept extras because you'd always need more of them. And then they the need for them went away. And the height on those should match the height of the standoffs once they're secured into the motherboard tray. So let's see. Let me test fit this. But what I'm going to do is just place this little nylon standoff, and you can buy these at Amazon, and they're not critical technically. They're critical in a sense of wanting to build the system correctly so that the board has the support the manufacturer believes it needs. If it didn't need that, then why did the ASRock engineers put that there? You don't know. You're dismissing something based on a lack of knowledge. I assure you, ASRock can justify that hole from the engineer's perspective who designed it that way. Other boards don't have it because their engineers have determined that they don't need it. Unless you're the engineer, I wouldn't try and second guess them, not if it were me. So what I'm going to do is just lay the case flat. We need to put this standoff back, the one that we took out for testing. And that one went right here. And I want to go this way. Here we go. Just like that. If you're hearing noise in the background, we have construction going on, and that's going to be going on for some time, for the next couple weeks. Just so you know, we are going to have some background noise, or we don't have videos. You know, we got to have to deal with it. The show must go on. There's always a debate as to when to put the liquid cooler radiator in. I personally, and it can vary, right? I can regret this decision, but I personally like to put the board in first and then work around the board. Because putting the cooler in first, because the hoses to the block are permanently attached and affixed, then I have to work around that, and it can bang up against things, it can scratch things, it can dent things if you're not real careful and aware of where that block is anytime I move the case up or down. And then I have to move it aside to get the board in. One way or another, there's going to be a little bit of a challenge fitting one first and the other one second. In some cases, you're required to do one first. But I think on this case, I can go either way, and it'll be an equal challenge. But we're going to find out. At some point, you just make a decision and roll with it. So that fits like a glove. Everything looks great. And so now I'm going to just simply secure the board in using the same screws and standoffs it had before. And just that nylon zip tie will accommodate, you know, my concern of just leaving an empty hole, which looks like someone did not do their complete job. All right, here we go. 9 screws. This is number 6, 7, 8, and number 9. Here we go. Okay. Really do wish I had that standoff. board fits in there like a glove. When we put the extended ATX board in there, which this case says it's compatible with, I mean, it's technically, that's true. I think I am mixing up things that came out of my ramekin. That should go over there. That one should go over there. Those are power supply screws. I think everything we had was in Ziploc bags. Nothing should be silver. I don't know what that's for. Should be all black screws in Ziploc bags. Yeah, these should be the ones that came with the case. And then I have this empty bag now again that I will reuse for other screws at another build at some point. I like to hold on to these because, as you can see, I like to separate the screws out and what kind of screw it is, and then keep them all together with the motherboard box. So with that, when I open up the motherboard box, you know, we have our Wi-Fi antennas in here. We have the documentation for the crucial SSD. It's crucial, not, did I say it was a team group? It's crucial. Our Go Faster sticker. Anyway, I'm gonna just take all these screws. We should be done with them now. Ideally, I've got a separate bag of screws. Oh no, it'll be on, I haven't used that cooler yet. So everything we need to mount the cooler's in the box. I have not had my grubby little hands on them. Tried to remember to put everything back. That's what happens when I reuse the cooler, right? I have to keep all the screws organized so I can put the cooler back. So anyway, that is the board installed, and you know, look, the color of it matches the case. And then if we want to just test fire it here, we can grab the power cable coming off our power supply, run that right through here. There was a piece here that we took off that's going to cover the cabling, but the problem is the board was so big that piece got in the way and we had to remove it. So I'm glad to be able to put that piece back on because it'll do a great job at hiding the cabling. And by the way, if you were adding a bunch of RGB cabling so that your cables light up, you wouldn't want to cover them up with that piece. Otherwise you wouldn't see the RGB that you just spent all the time and money. So anyway, that's just something more to consider. I have our USB 3 and 3.1 header here, but my main concern is getting the 12-volt power connector on there, which is right here. And we do have two 8-pin connectors, which is good because this board has two 8-pin CPU power connectors, and not many power supplies will come with two. If you're not overclocking, and we're not going to be, you only need to use one of them. But if we have two connectors and our power supply can supply power to both connectors, it doesn't benefit us not to plug it in. But it may not be worth it to buy a brand new power supply that has two connectors if it's not a feature of the board you will be utilizing, but rather you just don't like having an empty plug, which, you know, that may be a valid excuse, I guess. But if this gets sold to somebody who wants to overclock it, they would not be able to overclock it to its ability without the additional power. That's why it's there. Other than that, you don't need it. We do have one other power cable. This is to the fan controller that uses a basic SATA power cable. And we do have a bit of tangling here, which unfortunately, I guess I did not do a very good job of straightening out when I was breaking this all down. My focus was probably on just tying up some of the cables to get them out of the way. This, for example, this is our front panel connector. That's power switch, LED, hard drive LED, reset switch, and they put it all on one connector on this Cougar case. I really appreciate it when case manufacturers put this on one connector because pretty much all modern motherboards follow the industry standard. Back in the day they didn't, but it's been this way for some time, and so the fact that they still sell cases where you've got to put each pair of wires on separately, 4 pairs, all right, so 8 wires total. This makes it so much easier, and it's keyed so you can only put it in one way. And it does look a lot like a USB front panel header, except the missing keys on the other row. And that way, if you're trying to plug it into a USB, it won't fit. And you might be struggling, scratching your head going, why doesn't my USB header go on? because it's not a USB header. And they usually say right on the plug, right on the piece that you're holding in your hand, if it's USB or if it's F panel, front panel. This one says F panel. So you don't have to guess. That's what I'm getting at. All right, going back to the case, I've got power connectors for a GPU, which we don't have installed. This is our SATA power connector. We always needed one of these, right? It's a modular power supply, and this would have already been connected anyway in order to power all the RGB we had in it. So thankfully, that's ready for us, ready to go. We'll plug that in, set that up right like so, and that should provide RGB power and fan power at the same time through this fan header, which we can also add 3 more fans onto optionally, so long as they're ARGB compliant. So if you're trying to repurpose older fans, they probably don't have this compliance. It's, again, some of the headaches you'll have trying to save money mixing old hardware with new is getting that compatibility. Also, the older hardware will be statistically the first to fail. So if we build this computer and we repurpose old parts because they still work fine and we're trying to save money, in a matter of weeks, months, or years, those used parts that we're carrying over, that we might have had to use adapters to even get them to work or add additional cabling, will ultimately bite you again because they will statistically be the first component of failure that you would have avoided had you used all new parts. Again, it depends on the age of the parts too, but the older it is, the more likely it is to fail. And on top of that, the less likely it is going to be compatible with the standards such as ARGB when everybody was sort of making up their own rules when RGB was first coming out. So those older fans that you have, keep them with older hardware. It's the best advice I can give you. Here's our USB 3 header. We can plug that in right there below our big 24-pin power connector. And then our USB 3.1 will go below that. So let me get that one plugged in first. And USB 3.1, again, it's on the case. If your case doesn't support that because you're mixing old hardware with new, these are the types of things you will be sacrificing, but you're still going to pay one way or another. You're going to pay because you don't have the ability to use this that the board provides that you paid for, because you didn't want to replace an old case that doesn't have this option, and there's no way to add it. So, well, I shouldn't say there's no way, but unless you're a case modder or you have a case that still has like 5¼ inch bays that you can add a bay to it, that would be a really old case. But I can guarantee that case does not have a Type-C connector on it. So then you sacrifice your Type-C connector on your motherboard, at least for the front one. You'll still have one in the back. Or you sacrifice the old case so that you could keep up with being able to utilize all the hardware you just invested in. So all those reasons why you should not mix and match old with new. And what would I define as old? I'd say if anything is 3 years old, minus a power supply. Power supply you can repurpose. Unless you bought something really, really super expensive, top of the line, you can get another maybe 2-3 years out of that to repurpose with new equipment. Maybe. If you bought it right at the cusp, like if you bought the most expensive case prior to the Type-C connectors being standard on cases, then you just missed it, you know? But in general, I'd say about 3 years. And 5 to 6 years on the real expensive stuff in general. I think we're ready to test fire this. I mean, if we did everything right, it should just fire up. The fan should spin, the RGB should light up. And then the remainder of this is pretty standard stuff. You know, if we want to put a GPU in there, cable management, obviously, which will be the nightmare that it was. There's a piece that goes back on here. But let's just see if it works. Let's do that. We're still on time, so this wasn't a whole lot of work, especially if I had done the research to look for the standoff last night. We could have avoided that, but it is what it is. I didn't even think about it. Let's see, keyboard and a mouse I need. I'll grab that from over here. Turn that on. Let's plug that in there. Turn the keyboard on. Now, because we have Windows already installed, I can plug into the internet on this boot. And I need an HDMI output. Now, this motherboard, it only gives us one video output, but it does give us two Thunderbolt ports that can put video out to a display port or HDMI for a total of 3 monitors simultaneously using the built-in video. In a case like this, a lot of people are going to put a gaming graphics card in there that usually has like 4 connections for up to 4 monitors. But I just want you to know you don't have to. And most people don't have more than 2 monitors. Few have 3, and even fewer have more than 3. So HDMI cable is what we need next. If I stop stepping on it, that would probably help. And we'll plug that in right there. Okay, so now flip the switch on the power supply. And somewhere up here, I have a power button on my USB ports up here. Hit the power button. Now look what's happening. That little ARGB cable was hitting the fan. Our little platform is spinning. And I just have, again, this air cooler on temporarily for testing. We do want to put this cooler in. So let's jump over to our HDMI and see what output we're getting out of this. I hope it's at the desktop. Do I want to check the drivers? Sure, let's check our drivers. Where's my mouse? There it is. This is a nice feature of ASRock where it can look for all of your drivers so you don't have to install them manually and you don't have to rely on trusting Windows updates to provide you the right drivers or any drivers at all. So it's an intelligent driver checker to look for any potential updates to drivers. And you'll see they're not offering us Norton or McAfee or any trial software. This is specifically honest and straightforward for drivers. I need to make the screen a little bit bigger so as I can read it. Full screen. There it is. So we've got a management engine driver, rapid RST driver, and INF. All this is Intel related. They're already checked. All I have to do is hit the update button and it does all the work for me. These are drivers for items we do have, and they are either missing or updated from what we have. Otherwise, they will not appear as options. It'll just come up and say you're current. The fact that it came up with something makes me glad I checked. By not having the right driver, the current version, or missing the driver entirely, you may not be aware. And then suddenly when you put your drivers in, the machine runs faster, it's more stable, and usually that's going to bring joy and happiness. Of course, you may not notice anything at all. And it's really easy. ASRock's made that so simple that we don't have to go to their website and search for the drivers manually and guess which ones we need, or check, our version versus what the latest version is and do all that by hand. That's the way we used to have to do it. Now these fans do seem a little bit loud to me, but that may be just the setting in the BIOS we have to adjust. And this little platform, I don't know if you can tell, but it is spinning. So if I put something on it, just grab this, it might be easier to tell that that's just a little display platform for you to put a figurine or whatever you like there to make your computer a curio cabinet, because that's what some people want, I guess. All right, so the last thing we have to do will be putting in the cooler, but I think I might save that for Sunday, maybe tomorrow or Sunday, depending on our schedule. And the reason I say that is we're almost at a 2-hour broadcast, and even though a good hour of that has been talking about the business, I feel like that's way more important. Whether or not that's what you came here to learn, you don't always get to learn what you want, but I guarantee the learning is what you need. And the point is that this education It all goes hand in hand with the physical work. To ignore one and do the other in either case would be doing half the job.
I love that so much.
You
It's
like
so
that, huh?
great. Yeah.
We'll just wait till we get this
you
360.
You want to cut the lights?
If you want to, sure, cut the lights. I can get the big spotlight. I don't know how that looks any better on the camera.
So pretty.
Yeah, and we have plenty of room up here for our liquid cooler to go on top, which I'm not a fan of because it means we're effectively blocking airflow when I set a box like this on top. But I just have to not do that with this case.
So pretty. I like it.
Yeah, it's with it not being overcrowded, it's gone back to more or less what the marketing photos look like, which is far more attractive. And not to undersell this motherboard either, the Z790 LiveMixer Wi-Fi from ASRock, that's a solid bargain. And even though I do have some criticisms of ASRock, what don't I have criticisms about? I like this more than I don't like it. And always making sure, regardless if it's Intel or AMD, that you're always using your latest BIOS, because that's going to make a big difference on these newer processors. Okay, we'll bring the lights back up. And I don't think we're missing any emails, are we? Okay. Well, with that, let's talk before we wrap it up for today. I'm happy to leave this, to be able to tie this with a nice little bow so that we can continue on from here with the cooler install. This install, when I do it on camera and we're talking, this is going to take twice as long to install than if I were just doing it alone. However, I do like sharing the build with you, and I do like interacting with you. So I will save this to do this on camera when we have the appropriate amount of time necessary to do that while interacting. So let me just take a quick look over here and see what's on your mind. Aaron Warner joins us and says hello. Marsman says, thanks for opening up the chat for us non-memberships. Well, don't thank me. You need to thank the troublemakers for leaving us alone. It's not our decision. It's the viewer's decision. You need to talk to your own community that you're a part of and take it up with them, not with us. So while I appreciate your saying thank you, you're saying thank you to the wrong person. Because the minute a member of that free non-membership community starts harassing us again, this goes back to members only chat. I want you to be aware of that. It's not just me being a nice guy. It's me returning what I'm receiving. So if I'm receiving kindness from non-members, I return it. And if any of those non-members are harassing and giving me trouble, then I shut it down. It's that easy. It's not like I'm making this decision. The viewers are. Be very, very clear. We're glad to have you here. But without our members, we wouldn't be making this video today, just so you know. We don't have any sponsorship here. Barry Klein with a $10 super chat says, just checking in and throwing in a 10 spot into the tip jar. Well, thank you, Barry. Good to see you, my friend. Martin Hogg, also in Scotland. We've got a lot of Scottish folks joining us today. As always, and very happy to see that, as well as Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, and England. The United States, of course. And I think Lawrence Pierre joins us from like Trinidad, if I'm not mistaken. Larry G contributed $10 earlier in Super Chat. He said, your builds are always great and they never get old. Thank you, Larry. Thank you for the kind words and thank you for the support. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, Mark Gaines joining us from Northern Ireland. Can't leave Northern Ireland out of the mix. Yeah, the fans do seem a little loud, and I'm sure that's just a BIOS setting I need to go in and change. David Graham had contributed $2 earlier, so thank you, Marlena. You're the best. Thank you for that, David. Mark Gaines with a £10 super chat. It says, nice, you're finally getting to use the Tryx Panorama cooler. I found it very easy to install in my new build. I appreciate that feedback because I've never installed one before and I've never heard of this company before. But again, I want to allow myself enough time that I'm not going to try and race against the clock to get it done. And we will pick that up, like I say, probably tomorrow or Sunday. I'm anxious to do it. So believe me, I don't want to stop here. And I don't really have much choice. Dennis Paulson had contributed $5 earlier in Super Chat, says it is 78 degrees Fahrenheit in Michigan. Wish I was there. You have no idea. And I don't know if I missed anything else here. Let me go over to my view activity. I think that takes me back all the way. Abdul Azim Patel just renewed membership. Now a member for 30 months. Thank you, Abdul. Okay, guys, questions, comments, this is the time to do it. I hope you're all having a great Friday. Hope you have a great weekend. I hope you're going to join me again here on the weekend to see this, get the cooler installed. After that, obviously, I'll do the cable management, any sort of RGB adjustment. That'll be done off camera because that's just nothing really to see. I'll put that piece back in here that once we're done, there's that big piece that's going to cover these cables so we won't see them. This cover goes back on over the power supply shroud. And then the glass panels go back on and the cable management is done. And that'll be that for this system, unless we later decide to add a graphics card, which we might, I don't know, we'll see. But I will leave the GPU power cable connected to the power supply and keep it tucked into the shroud since we have room for it, rather than separating it out. Because if there's any cable somebody might want to need or might need in the future, it'll be for, you know, a machine like this having a GPU is pretty well expected. A discrete GPU. William Lynn says, are inland products exclusive of Micro Center? I think so. I'm not sure. We don't have any Micro Centers in Phoenix. They're supposed to be opening one, but I don't know when. And I don't know how far away it'll be. I suppose we could ask Google. See what Google says. Are inland products exclusive, not expensive, exclusive to Micro Center? Yes. Inland products are primarily, if not exclusively, available at Micro Center. And Micro Center does sell product at Amazon. So you can find inland products being sold by Micro Center on Amazon, if that doesn't get confusing. It's a brand owned by Microelectronics Incorporated, which is the parent company of Micro Center. And it's often used as Micro Center's house brand. This means you're unlikely to find inland products sold elsewhere in the same way you'd find major brand names like Samsung or Corsair. And while inland products may be available through online retailers like Amazon, it is generally understood that they are Micro Center's own brand. And this makes them a Micro Center exclusive brand in a way, even if you can sometimes find them on other platforms like Amazon. But if you look at who the seller is on Amazon, the seller is often Micro Center for those inland products. But Amazon does allow third-party sellers that could buy and then resell like a scalper, any brand, inland or otherwise. But there you go. Hope that answers your question. Get back over to my chat room. Again, if you have questions for me, this will be the time to ask. Andy Kane says, with regards to the stock cooler, where would you use it when you install the Tryx 360? Andy, none of the Intel Core Ultras come with coolers. They only have the unlocked version of the processors. They were supposed to come out with an entire family of these. But these are K or KF processors only, the F meaning they don't have built-in graphics. And universally, any CPU that has the letter K contains no CPU cooler. So we have repurposed a CPU cooler from a 14th gen or 13th gen, or even 12th gen for that matter. This is a big stock Intel cooler. And what a lot of you may not realize is the non-K version of an Intel CPU at this flagship level is significantly more money because of that cooler. That's a $60 cooler. That's included at no additional cost when you buy a non-K 14900, 13900, 12900 CPU. So let me show you. If we go over to Amazon, let me jump over to Amazon here, and let's go to our screen capture, which, yeah, that's what I want. I want to show you something. Let's say we're looking for a 14900K. So in the YouTube viewer consumer perspective, that's the best 14900 you can buy. That's the consensus, regardless of reality. There's a group think mob mentality happening on the internet that does not equate to factual scientific information. It's just a bunch of people who all agree regardless of what the facts are, or they agree because of their values, but it's not necessarily a value. But let me just show you what I'm talking about. So here's an Intel i9 14900K. This will not come with a cooler. It's a thin little box, just like the Core 7 Ultra I'm showing you today. It's $423. If you want the non-K version, which most viewers that watch YouTube videos or get their education virtually rather than in reality, the virtual consensus is that this is the better processor, except when you price it, you will find an alternate reality that might be foreign to you, because a 14900 without the K on it is $620. Now, I don't know about you, but that's, according to my math, about $190 price difference for the processor that's worse. How do you explain that? Why would the worse processor be more money? And I'm going to posit a thought for you to consider, because it's the better processor and it's worth more. That's why it costs more. It just may be better in ways you don't appreciate or have not been introduced to you from the enthusiasts on the internet. Whether that's a forum or a YouTube video, a lot of what people say gets repeated and assumed to be accurate without any verification or checking. So while the K version is unlocked, that in and of itself is what a lot of people are driving towards. But it may not be necessary to have an unlocked processor when overclocking is mostly being handled by the BIOS regardless if it's a K or not. So for the additional money, you're getting this amazing cooler. But because of the complete momentum of people talking rather than people actually doing any work, the people who know understand why this processor costs more, and the people who don't know are baffled that there's so many stupid people that would pay that much for a processor that's worse, because it doesn't occur to them this processor's better. It's not presented by the masses that continually do what others do without free thinking as an individual, or that they share values where the unlocked processor has value because it's unlocked. So because of this nature of the way we socialize as animals, we're following a consensus and we're not independently doing our own work. We're assuming the work somebody else did is not only accurate, but it's accurate to the same values we have. So if their information's right under the circumstance that unlocked processors are important, then they're right. But if an unlocked processor isn't important, then they're wrong. That's why it's important for you to not just adopt somebody else's attitude without doing any research if it's something important to you. And if it's not important to you, you shouldn't have an opinion one way or the other. That's my opinion. Anyway, so this cooler comes with this really nice cooler that you're looking at today. But what does the internet say? The internet says, almost universally, any stock cooler is junk. They're wrong. They are so wrong. No company can stay in business selling inferior product that, results in a negative customer experience where that customer is not going to return. You're not going to have a company as big as Intel or AMD. They'll never get that big. They're selling you exactly what's needed, all right? Not emotionally what's needed. In this case, this cooler keeps a 14900 cool, keeps a 13900 cool, it keeps a 12900 cool. So it should keep an Ultra 7 cool. Therefore, even if it's not the best cooler choice overall for a number of different reasons, because people are so easily gullible and manipulated, online specifically, they're trying to prove how smart they are by letting somebody else do the work and telling them, hey, those Intel coolers are crap. You should buy a liquid cooler, right? Never mind how you're using the computer. They don't even ask you that. The content creators assume that you share their values. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you've never thought there were other options to consider and that there's multiple right answers. So what do these people do in mass? The masses get this incomplete information, assume it is real. They take the stock cooler out of their 14900 and they put it on eBay, okay? Because that's a crap cooler. Even though it isn't, this is what they choose to believe based on what they've been told, which is a unique and isolated perspective to a specific value system of the person talking. Even though they don't know each other, they can't verify they share the same values. This content creator is assuming everybody's values are mine. And therefore, according to my values, all stock coolers, no matter who makes them, are inadequate and inferior. And that you would buy a third-party cooler to spend more money to replace what you already bought under the guise that it's better. But better how? Better because it has RGB, better because it looks cooler, better because you're going to overclock and overvolt and you need that extra cooling that the original cooler wasn't designed for, better because of noise, simply because you don't know how to control your fan speed in your BIOS that could eliminate that at no cost. There's a ton of information that you are not being told and you don't know it's missing. You don't know what you don't know. But the benefit for those of us who do know is I can go on eBay, and so can you, and you can find these Luminaire $60 coolers for 20 bucks a piece, never used. They never even tried them. They never evaluated how good that cooler is. And they might not have done it simply because they don't like the way it looks. That's why we're taking it off. This cools this chip just fine. I can run Cinebench on it right now and show you. But I want this cooler in there for the looks. That's already paid for. It was included in the price of the CPU. That's part of the reason why the K CPU costs less. It doesn't have the $60 cooler in the box. And if you want to sell me your $60 cooler for 20 bucks, 30 bucks, I'm buying them. And they're going to sit on a shelf. So that way, when I'm prepping a motherboard that's eventually going to have a liquid cooler, I can set it up temporarily with this cooler that doesn't require any backplate or anything. Just screw it down. It's in, let's go, let's get it running. Now we verify everything's good to go. Windows is installed, updates, drivers, Windows is activated. Now I put my liquid cooler on with confidence that I'm not gonna have to take everything back apart for a repair unless I broke something in the process of installing the liquid cooler. If I know it all worked before I put it in, and now it doesn't work after I put it in, then I broke it, all right? So it amazes me how many people don't think for themselves anymore. They absolutely are either completely lazy or they choose to believe what they're being told is not perspective-based, but is fact-based under like a blanket statement. This is universally good for all people. Rarely is anything good for all people, anything at all. We're all different and we all have a different value system. We have different amounts of money and different budgetary restraints. We have different things that are important to us. Your children are probably important to you, but not so much to people outside of the family, any more so than any other random person. So it doesn't mean you're wrong to say that those things that are important to you are important, but that fact only resides to you and a small other group of people compared to other people's children and how you feel about their children, which also doesn't make you wrong. But then for you to make videos about it and for people to watch those videos, then they believe those other people's children, according to your perspective, are inferior to yours and yours are better, and that's why everybody should have your children. And then analogy kind of loses But the preposterous, it's so absurd that it's bizarre to me that this is not obvious and clear to individuals, but repeatedly and time again, I continue to see the same behavior from the public that comes from a place that they're very confident of what they know. But they aren't asking themselves what they don't know and what information is being omitted, and further, why? What aren't you being told? When you watch my videos, what am I not telling you? I'm not aware of what I'm not telling you, just as these content creators are likely not doing this on purpose. It's your job to make sure you're getting all of the information, and it's your determination to determine if that information applies to you. It's not 2 + 2 = 4. It varies depending on your values, how you're going to use the computer, how much money you've got to spend, whether or not the looks are all that important. I mean, that looks pretty good to me, and it works well, and it came with the 14900, but not with any 14900 I bought. These aren't my extra coolers, because if I had it, I would have used it. So I'm looking for the people who don't value this, and they sell it to help reimburse their cost. They could say, well, if I can get 30 bucks from this or 20 bucks on eBay, that helps offset how much it cost me to buy the chip. Well, that's why they should have bought a K processor. If they didn't want that, they would have spent less money. Because even if you sell this for 30 bucks and pay the PayPal fees and the eBay fees and put it in a box and then ship it and deal with all that, you're still paying more for the 14900. It's a bad purchasing decision if you never had any intended. If you were never planning to use the cooler, why did you buy a CPU that comes with a cooler? You paid for that cooler just to turn around and say it's terrible. You could have bought the cooler, you could have bought the CPU without the cooler and not been stuck with the extra cooler. So I don't understand the mentality of the public, and it's clearly being, what's the word, exploited. That logic, whatever you use to justify not doing your own research, you're paying for that. And other people are profiting from it. So they don't want you to do your own research, because then you might realize you don't need to spend your money, and then they won't make as much money. They want to keep you in the dark if they're the ones profiting from it. And you might like being in the dark and don't mind paying the extra money. I make the assumption none of us want to be in the dark and none of us want to waste money. But my assumption is apparently inaccurate because I'm seeing what people are actually doing. It blows my mind. Okay. So there you go, Andy. That is a cooler. It's a stock cooler with an E12900, 13900, 14900. And only K processors exist in the Ultra series, which universally never have come with coolers. All right, so I hope that answers your question, and you understand the logic and reasoning behind why it's in there temporarily and how easy it is to remove. We'll put it back on the shelf. We'll use it again. And maybe the next system we use it in, we keep it in there. I've used a number of these where that is the final cooler for that build. For this build, I want the liquid cooler, I want the Tryx, I want the aesthetic, but I'm not buying it for the cooling. If all I cared about was the cooling, that's fine. Not only is it fine, it looks fantastic, and it's probably better than a lot of third-party coolers that you would then buy, you know, air coolers, let's say. It's far more attractive and easier to install, almost universally, and you've already paid for it. Ron Barnish renews membership, now a member 34 months. He says, another month of support? Yes. Right on. Thank you, Ron. If you want to buy one of these coolers, you just go to eBay. Let's take a look at eBay real quick. Let me jump over there. There are a couple different versions of this cooler. So you want to pay attention to which version they're selling, because you might end up with a shorter cooler. Let's take a look. I keep grabbing the wrong mouse and keyboard. Let's go to eBay together. Let's take a quick look at how I shop for these. So the last time around, one seller, probably a computer builder, where customers are saying, I don't want that cooler. So their computer builder is left with all these extra coolers. And I think one seller had like 10 of them. And I think I bought all 10. Put it all in one package, save me on the shipping. And I've got plenty of extras now. I don't need to shop for more. But I think it's called an Luminar CPU cooler. And eBay will probably correct my spelling here. Clearly, I'm not spelling it correctly because I'm not getting anything in the photos that matches. Laminar? Maybe it's laminar. Okay, so this is a laminar RM1, and this is what you've got to watch. This is the stock cooler that comes with like the i5 and i7 non-K CPUs. So we don't want the RM1. What we're looking for, we're looking for an RGB. See, look at how many this person has. This person has 34 RM1s. And this one is all metal. Is it still an RM1? See the blue ring around this? Ours does not have the blue ring. Ours has the extra RGB. Still looks like they're calling it a laminar RM1. And then there's a part number on top of that. I think it's this one. So if I reduce my search or specify my search as RM1 ARGB, likely I should get all the right cooler this time. Yeah, 30 bucks. Now, bear in mind, they're charging you $8 to $13 for shipping here. This is not a light item. I would not expect shipping for free. This person's got one for $15 with buy it now. But how much do they want for shipping? 10 bucks. They're everywhere, and they just screw down into the board. It's the easiest thing to install. You will have to typically apply your own thermal compound unless they're selling you a brand new one. Even sometimes in shipping, that thermal compound's not protected. So you might receive your cooler with smeared compound. If that's the case, I would clean it off and apply my own. But if it's in great shape and it's never been used, it's already got thermal compound applied. So 25 bucks and free delivery, that's a great deal. Person's got 100% positive on 672 feedbacks. So I wouldn't be worried about not receiving my product. Although he's not showing you the actual product, he's got sort of a stock photo, but I wouldn't expect it to be any different. You can also read the description to explain. Maybe they tell you why they've got them. But they're not hard to find. It's people don't know. But the people who do know, they're benefiting. 35 bucks, buy it now with free delivery. That's a good price. I wouldn't go any higher than that, just given that the delivery is not, there's no added cost for shipping. So with the cost built in, that's still a fair price, but you could also, you know, do better. 40 is a little too much, I think. This person has sold 22 of these, so they're likely a system builder and they just have these parts left over. That's what the thermal compound will look like when it's brand new and never used. But again, if it's put into a box that doesn't get packed properly, the protection above it could get mashed down and smear that all over the place, in which case I wouldn't use it. I would just wipe it off and apply some fresh thermal compound on the CPU, not on the cooler. But stay away from the ones with the blue ring if you're trying to cool a high-end CPU. If you're trying to cool an i5 or an i3, nothing wrong with these. Nothing wrong with these at all. In fact, you've seen me use these on other i5 like 13500s. Not a 13600K, because that will not come with a cooler. The 13500 includes this cooler. It pushes in, little snaps, 4 of them. Thermal compound's already applied, there's no RGB. Gets the job done, keeps the CPU cool. It is not inadequate, it is not loud. That's why Intel includes it. And you're paying for it when you buy the coolers that, the CPUs that come with these coolers. You're not getting them for free, you're paying for them. So the idea that you're buying something that you're saying is junk, why did you buy it? Make up your mind. I don't get it. I just don't get the public sometimes. I'll profit from it, and I'll share with you how I'm profiting from it. There's no secret. I'm not twisting anybody's arm. I'm not telling them to buy stuff to turn around and resell it unused. But if they're going to insist on doing it because other channels are suggesting it's not good enough, I have no moral I don't feel bad about it, right? They're making their decision without any influence from me. So yeah, if they want to do that to themselves and I'm going to profit from it, sure, why wouldn't I? Their decision. I'm not in any way swaying them. It's already listed for sale, so if it's a good price, why shouldn't I reward myself from their lack of understanding the value of it? Or again, maybe they just wanted something that looks different. But again, they could have just bought a CPU that didn't have that cooler. This is just not what the public does. It's just not what they do. And if you're aware of that, you can have that work for you rather than be a part of it. But I'm okay if you want to be a part of it, because I'll profit off of it too. I don't mind. But I'm strongly advising you to be on the other side of that fence. But there are good reasons why people don't like the cooler, don't want the cooler, and still want to buy that CPU. I guess. Doesn't make any sense to me. Dennis Hill said, will Intel warranty an RMA without a cooler if it originally came with one? Will Intel warranty an RMA without a cooler? If you have an RMA for an Intel CPU, then the warranty is on the CPU. If you have an RMA on an Intel cooler, then your warranty is on the cooler. So Intel warranties those differently. If you have a bad cooler under warranty, you can fill out an RMA to have that replaced. You would not send in your CPU. And the true is, it's the same the other way around. If you have a problem with the CPU, but no problem with the cooler, you'll only send back the CPU, and only a CPU will be returned to you. So it's not like other products where the RMA has to have everything back. Intel doesn't want to go through the shipping cost of a cooler when it's not necessary. Chip is cheap to ship by comparison. Hey, there's Steve Bass. I haven't seen Steve in a long time. Why is Steve not a moderator here? We're going to make sure he is a standard moderator. Good to see you, Steve. Steve had joined us back at Studio A when we built a computer side by side. Apparently that computer must still be working, I'm guessing, because he's joining us in the chat. Although we haven't talked in a while. Maybe he's replaced it. He says, that's quite a neon machine. It looks like an old disco club I used to go to in the late 60s. Just a lot less cocaine. Sorry, I cracked myself up. David Martinez says that computer build looks amazing. I'll wait till you see when it's done. William Lin points out the pricing discrepancy across CPUs. I see too many people looking for patterns where no patterns exist, and I don't know what the logic is, that if a 14900 costs more than a 14900K, then for some reason they think a 14700 should cost more than a 14700K. The economics of the marketplace do not dictate the price is the same. It's dictated based on what the value is. In other words, how much can we get for this? Also, the 14700 does not include the $60 cooler. The 14700 contains the cheaper plastic non-RGB cooler, which is probably a $10 cooler. So you're looking at a $10 cooler versus a, whatever the other coolers were, 50, 60 bucks for the one we're using today. They are not to be compared because you're not buying the same thing. Therefore, the price reflects that. If you want to compare 14900s to 14900s when comparing prices, that makes sense. But comparing two unrelated models from the same manufacturer will result in a different pattern of pricing because of the variances in those models. So I think you have gravely misunderstood and miscomprehended the point I was trying to make. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because if you did it, probably others are thinking the same way. The world is not black and white. And we're not comparing apples to apples here. You're comparing a completely different CPU with a completely different cooler under the assumption that that will be worth more for the same reason the other one's worth more. But if you consider what you're buying, it is priced based on what it's worth or the perceived value of the public. So this cooler you're looking at is all metal and RGB. That's going to add a lot of perceived value in addition to actual value and production cost of what it costs to make that cooler. That's going to reflect on that CPU price. That does not apply to the 14700. So, yeah, the world is not a literal place. There is so much gray that requires an understanding of exactly what you're comparing. It's not like you're comparing a 14700 with this cooler. If you were, then you'd have an interesting point, but you're not, and I don't think you're aware of it. So the cooler is the part of it that's really making the biggest price difference.
And also, another reason why a non-K CPU may be preferred is that the unlocked processors don't really have much value to people who aren't overclocking. With motherboards today doing a lot of the overclocking for you, that need for the unlocked processor kind of diminishes. And if you want to go back, all processors were unlocked. The only reason Intel locked them was to add value to people who wanted to overclock them. So this was in response to what the public was doing. And when the public starts doing something in mass, like this becomes a trend, then a manufacturer might say, you know, we'll do this automatically for the public, so they don't have to be like an exclusive little clique who has to understand how overclocking works. So Asus, I think, started that with their automatic overclocking options. And then that extended beyond and grew by other manufacturers because people saw value in that, particularly product reviewers. Said, look how easy this is to overclock. You push a button, it does it automatically. Then other manufacturers realized we can do that with non-K processors. So Intel is still selling locked versus unlocked, which is a new concept. It hasn't been around that long. There used to just be a processor. Maybe you got a Mathco processor, maybe you didn't. That's why there's a 486DX and a 486SX. They don't do that anymore. All processors get Mathco processors built in. It's not an option. And then all processors were unlocked. And then the trend started. And so they responded, realizing they could exploit this to make more money and manually lock some processors. In doing so, it locks in the reliability of that processor by not giving the user the ability to screw it up. And that can have more value to some viewers or owners who don't want they don't want that extra 7% of performance or the extra 12% in exchange for degrading the CPU faster, resulting in potentially more crashes or instability issues. That's worth more to them. On the other hand, it's worth more to others to be able to screw it up. That's how they entertain themselves. Now, I'm not here to tell you which one's better than the other, but I'm here to tell you why they exist. And it's all marketing. There's nothing specific about one CPU or the other that requires it locked or unlocked. That is a marketing tool to justify adding more cost or whether or not to include a cooler or not include a cooler. Traditionally, people who buy unlocked processors will never be happy. These are unhappy people that will never be happy. And if they are happy, it's because they have spent a lot of money and a lot of time to eke out a little bit more performance than everybody else gets. And that happiness will be very limited because the new line of processors will be out within 6 months in general, just overall, about every 6 months, that will automatically run out of the box as fast as all their effort and money that they made to get theirs to go 7% faster. Well, now they're 7% faster out of the box. So enjoy your 6 months of happiness. You know what I mean? For whatever that costs you, that you did all that extra effort and all that extra work, when the rest of us can just open up the next generation, plug it in, and get that automatically. So then what they have to do is go and buy the unlocked version of that one and start all over again. They're not going to be using a stock cooler for that because it would never meet their strict requirements and intolerance. That's because they can pay for that luxury. And Intel and other manufacturers are happy to take that money. More than happy. That is a much higher profit margin than selling to the general public. People will pay more for perceived value, even if that value, even if the cost is 25% more, and the end result, if you're very skilled, is 12% better. You've lost your value. But now it's not about value anymore. Now it's about numbers. It's about the physical frequencies that you're hitting. That's a bizarre thing when processors are so fast today. When the old processors were running at 33 megahertz, not 5.800, not 5800, 33, okay? When you could get 7% faster, that was significant. It was a pretty big noticeable difference. But an end user noticing a 7 to 12% difference in performance, highly unlikely outside of benchmarks. Unless you're very specialized, in which case you probably do make a lot of money and can afford that. But that does not represent the mass population around the world. It's chasing a dream. It's chasing how can I explain this? It doesn't matter to most people, and it doesn't have to. If it's something you enjoy and you can afford that, don't let me get in your way. But I'm not here to appeal to a little tiny portion of the public. I want my videos to appeal to the general public. And for that matter, for that reasoning, I don't want to ignore them, and I'm not here to make them feel inferior. Or they're simply not representative of who I'm trying to attract as an audience. As a technician, I work on Windows, not because Windows is better. I work on Windows because that's where the work is. If I work on Mac or I work on Linux, there's still work, it's just harder to find. So do I want to work at finding the work, so when I find the work, I can do the work? Or would I like to focus on actually doing the work and having the work much easier to find that needs to be done? It doesn't make Windows better. It makes it more sustainable for me to run my business, to find the work. If everybody, with the majority of public, were using Apple products, guess what I'd be doing? Or if it was Linux. It's not my personal preference. I'm just trying to run a business, and so many people take it as though I've insulted their mother. I can't help but wonder, what's going on in their life? How can I help them? Because it's not through videos like this. This is not the kind of help they need. It's a very strange association to a faceless, soulless corporation that's trying to bilk you for every penny to the greatest amount of profit. And how you can embrace that corporation to a point where you feel offended when you don't have anything to do with them is just something I can't wrap my mind around. I was talking to a friend once about his football team, meaning the football team in the city that he's from, not the city that he lives. And I asked him, why do you get so worked up about any sort of questioning of the behavior of this team? Like, they're deflating footballs. I mean, how do you feel about that? And you'd think I just said, you're a jerk. How do you go around being a jerk? That's not what I said, but his reaction was the same. Every football team does that. They've been doing it for years. Why are you getting upset? Sorry, I brought it up. You'd think that guy was an investor in the team. He played on the team. No. The only thing he has in common with that team is I grew up there where that team plays. I don't live there anymore. But don't you insult them. Don't you question their integrity, because they're not doing anything they're not bad. Just because they're in the news because they were caught doesn't mean everybody else isn't doing it and hasn't been caught. Why are you so emotional about this? Well, we see the same with Intel and AMD, and I don't get it. I don't really care. I want to make sure my customers get what they need at a fair price that's going to be reliable, it's going to perform well, and it doesn't matter to me if it's Intel or AMD. Sometimes Intel has a better value, sometimes AMD has a better value. Nobody's been king of the hill. It's just across the board indefinitely. Intel was king of the hill for a long time, but AMD came back. And Intel became king of the hill. It goes back and forth, back and forth. Who sold more computers, HP or Dell? Depends when you ask. In some years, HP sold more. In other years, Dell sold more. Google it. One is not consistently always the leader. They trade places. Now, one might be the leader more often. It's not going to be exactly 50-50, but it's also, they're not just walking it in either. They're busting their butts, doing the best they can, trying to outperform the last thing they did, but so's their competitor. And sometimes their competitor does better than they do for a number of various reasons. That's how it goes. So for you to get offended personally when you have nothing to do with either company other than you've spent and given them your money, and then on top of that, you're going to defend them like it's some kind of something you worship. They don't feel the same about you. I don't know how to break this to you. That football team isn't coming to his defense. They don't know who he is. That corporation only wants to sell you more. And as long as you keep buying, they'll keep fulfilling their contractual obligation with you. And if you stop buying, they don't care. They won't miss you when you're gone. So it's a one-way relationship in that you care, they don't. They only care about your money. They want your business. So long as you keep giving them your business in exchange, they'll continue to provide your product. That's it. If you find that to be a good transaction, I'm not here to tell you you're wrong. I may not agree with it, but you may not agree with my transactions. But my transactions are based on pleasing other people, not myself. I have to please the customers. And on multiple levels. I can't sell them a part I can't get. Might be a better part, but it's not in stock. Customer needs a machine. They have this budget. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be secure. Look, I have to answer those needs of each individual, not just of my selfish self. But the viewers of YouTube videos, it's like they don't consider anybody else but themselves. It's really strange. Why would you use that? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because I'm not building it for you. Did that thought ever occur to you? It's weird. Not that everybody does it, but the ones who do it make themselves very well known. They can't keep that to themselves. They have to make sure everybody knows they only think of themselves, and it's weird. It's very strange. Jim Smith says, congratulations, Carey. You expressed a critical concept that many folks won't or perhaps can't accept. Assume personal responsibility. Very good. Keep going, Carey. You're doing well. At the end of the day, that's essentially what I'm talking about, right? Be responsible for your decisions. You don't need anybody's approval to tell you you did okay, unless you were working for them and they were compensating you. Seeking approval is just going to lead a life of disappointment. But when you're trying to seek sales, that is a form of approval that has a payday. And you will know if you're succeeding or not by whether or not you're making enough money and you have customers that seem pleased and aren't complaining with the work you do. That's your true measure of looking for approval, is when there is something that you have to lose. I have business to lose. If I lose my business, I'm going to be in a world of trouble. I'm going to have to figure out some other way to make money. So it's not something on a whim that I decide emotionally. I have to consider the values of each customer. I have to consider their expectations and their budget. This is regarding timeline. It's regarding even if the customer says, I don't want any AMD CPUs in my office, I'm not there to convince them otherwise. Just nod my head and say no problem. That's what they want. What do I care? I don't work for Intel or AMD. I'm paid the same. Give the customer what the customer wants, not what you want. It's a big difference. And it's what determines what a job is versus what a hobby is. When you're doing something for a hobby, you're doing it selfishly for your own benefit. Nothing wrong with that. But to compare that against a business and to suggest that the business isn't making the right decisions suggests to me that you have no concept of how business works. Because otherwise, why would you do that? Doesn't make any sense. Just because you think something is better doesn't mean the world agrees with you, and it isn't required. It's not a prerequisite. It doesn't make a difference to whether or not I can pay my bills at the end of the month if some random viewer agrees with me or not. That's why it's not important. But the person that I'm building the system for, the actual customer who's paying me, they are of utmost critical priority to me. And it's what their thoughts are that matter. They have influence. And they have influence because they have power. The power is money. That's the money that keeps me in business. The people that don't have any impact on my business at all, their thoughts are not important to me because they're not seeing the entire picture. If they did, they probably wouldn't have made the suggestion. All right. The fun part of being a content creator is dealing with a public that overall thinks of themselves, thinks of their own needs and their own values and nobody else's. That is the preponderance of attitude you will acquire on the internet. You'll see it. That's not everybody, but it's definitely the majority. And it's very weird to me. Because when has that ever worked for anybody? What's in it for them? It serves no purpose. Dennis Hill said, I gave up overclocking a long time ago. David Graham said, I need my CPU to last a long time, so I don't want to overclock it. Yeah, overclocking it, you are going to be pushing that harder than it's designed, and over a period of time, it will wear it out sooner, for lack of a better explanation. Silicon degradation that occurs through operating it beyond its normal tested scenario, normal use case, will result in an unnormal lifespan. And if you were to do that to your car, I mean, leave your refrigerator door open all the time so the compressor is constantly working day after day after day. See what your electric bill is and see how long that refrigerator lasts, if that's what you continually do to it. If you have the budget to afford to overclock, because you're going to be replacing the computer just to keep up every year anyway, or every 2 years, the degradation won't affect you. It's very unlikely. On the other hand, if you're trying to set world records, your CPU will likely burn out within about 2 minutes. You will be sacrificing a CPU so that you can say, I set a new world record for 2 minutes. After that, the CPU is no longer warranted. It is e-waste, and nobody seems to have a problem with that complete waste of money and that complete addition of e-waste done for no valid purpose other than to set a world record and get attention to yourself. Yes, you were able to do that for a few seconds or a few minutes, and the cost of doing it was you completely toasted a processor voluntarily. Not to mention the liquid nitrogen they have to use to cool it. That's not cheap either. And it's dangerous. You can hurt yourself. For what? It's thousands and thousands of dollars for a 2-minute test if you're successful. It's still the same thousands of dollars if you're not successful. It's just not a world I live in, man. It's just not how I would spend $2,000. But that's pretty extreme. That doesn't represent the vast majority of overclockers, but those are the ones who the overclockers look up to and say, oh, I wonder if I could beat that guy. It's all very competitive. It's very, very primal behaviors. But, you know, it's not hurting anybody. You know, presuming everybody's responsible for themselves. If you want to go into $20,000 in credit card debt to do something you can't afford to do, I'm not your father. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I don't care what your mother says. Barry Klein said, my system completes tasks so damned quickly that I can't imagine what exactly I'd get out of overclocking that would make it worth the shortened CPU life and extra cooling rates. That's my point. We're reaching a point in technology of diminishing returns. Why would anybody have more than 32 gigs of RAM installed? You're likely not using more than 32 gigs of RAM. We've been through this. But back in the day, when we only had 4 gig modules and 8 gig modules, what was holding us back was having more RAM because we're swap filing to a slow mechanical hard drive. We don't do that anymore. But yet the mentality of 20 years ago is still being applied to today's technology, and it's dumb. If you have 64 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of RAM, but you're never utilizing ever more than 32, then it's the same as not having all that extra RAM. If you're not using it, it's the same as not having it, but you paid extra for it. Your system takes longer to boot up because of it. And you're thinking, oh, it's faster now. It isn't. It's not any faster. If anything, you made it slower. The technology isn't the same as it was. It keeps moving forward. And people want to hold on to these old ideas and try to apply them to the new tech, and they're resistant to believe anything otherwise because that's what they were taught. And what you were taught was right then. It's not right today unless you're still using that old technology. If you still have a Pentium-based processor with a mechanical drive, then yes, adding more RAM will help you as far as performance. But today, check your RAM usage. Who's using more than 32 gig? It's a complete waste of money. When I see so many people struggle financially, and then on the other side, I see people waste money on things they don't need that performs no benefit, it's outrageous. Outrageous. This machine has 32 gigs of RAM in it. Now, if a customer tells me I want 192 gigs of RAM, well, then that's what I'll put in. But I will let them know you're likely wasting your money. I would advise you to put in half as much RAM first. And if you still feel like you need it, we can add the additional RAM. And the customer can say, I agree or I disagree, and that conversation is over either way. I don't care. I just want to make sure the customer gets what they want. It doesn't have to make any sense. Barry Klein said he's got 128 gigs of RAM, but I also run a buttload of virtual machines on the same box. Yes, if you run virtual machines, there are absolutely use case scenarios where 128 gigs of RAM would benefit, but what you are is an exception. So all the people who think they need 128 gigs of RAM, if we put them all on one side of the room, let's just say everybody's got 128 gigs of RAM in general, how many of those people do you think actually benefit from it? I'm not saying nobody ever. I'm saying very few, a very tiny percentage, less than 10%, probably less than 5%, actually run virtual machines and have a legitimate reason that they can justify it. The other people justify it because it's better. When you ask them to explain how it's better, they cannot. Look, I saw a video on the news of a woman who locked herself out of her Tesla, and she doesn't have common sense enough to look on the phone to see how to unlock her Tesla, but somehow she has the kind of money to buy a Tesla. It hurts my brain. How can you be so ignorant and have so much money? Am I doing this all wrong? Am I trying too hard? Should I just be completely ignorant and then suddenly I'll get rich? I don't know. Maybe it wasn't her money. Maybe she's inherited or married into money. I just can't imagine how you could be so wealthy and not understand just basic fundamental critical thinking. Like, how did you get the money? This hurts my brain. I promise you, if I had the money to buy a Tesla, I'd know how to use it. I would take the time and I would want to know. I wouldn't wait and then call strangers for help without using my phone in my hands to help myself first. It's a weird world, man. Weird. David Graham wants to know if we're putting this in tomorrow. I'm not sure if it's tomorrow or Sunday. It depends on the renovation schedule. So you just have to be subscribed and turn your notifications on. And as soon as we know, Mara will release that, hopefully with at least 12 hours of notice or more. So I don't intend to make it like a last minute thing, but I also cannot tell you today yet because I don't know what's happening tomorrow. David Graham says you don't have to be smart to have money, just lucky. Yeah. But are most people who have money smart, or are they just lucky? I think most of them are smart. I think most of the people who have money, and I could be wrong, I'm just basing it on what I see around me, are intelligent people who earned it, not lottery winners or generational wealth from parents who did well. But it definitely doesn't have to be one or the other. But I think the majority of people who have money earned it. They could be scammers. They could have earned it through scamming. It doesn't mean they're intelligent. So I see what you're saying there. Dennis Hill mentions large language models for AI use a lot of RAM. I've never met anybody in real life that runs a local large language model. Never met that person. And I'd be curious why they're doing it. It's not typically a consumer-based activity. That's an enthusiast activity that represents a very, at this point in 2025, very niche group of people. But the point is, I think if you're running virtual machines, if you're at that technical level of knowledge that you understand what a virtual machine is and you use them, then you don't need to take advice from me about how much RAM you should have. You're already above who the audience I'm building, making these content for. You're above that level of knowledge of the average user. If you're running a local large language model, you are already above. Look, if this is an introduction to history classroom, and you work at the Museum of History, right? You're at the Smithsonian, you've been working there 20 years, and you come into my entry-level class, you're going to roll your eyes at a lot of things you already know. This information's not for you. You don't represent, your level of knowledge does not represent the masses. But yet the masses are buying 128 gigs of RAM. They are. And they have no legitimate purpose for using it. It's their money. I'm not saying they can't. But I'm asking you, do you think about that before you make your purchases? Are you just following what you got in, basically manipulated by some marketing content? Or do you actually understand what you're buying and can justify it? Not that you have to. It's just a rule I follow. Dennis Hill said everyone will have one on their phone someday. Yeah, well, that's probably true. But that's not today. I'm not talking about trying to predict the future. The technology will continue to evolve, and what's extreme today will be considered, typical and expected tomorrow. Take electricity. When electricity first came out, only the rich people had it. But eventually, electricity got distributed to everyone equally. Now imagine you walk into a place of business, let's just say a grocery store, and they've decided we don't need that electricity. We're fine. We're going to just throw ice in a box, and that's where the refrigerated food will be. And we're going to light the place up at night with candles or lanterns. Are you going to shop there? I'm not talking about an outdoor open market. I'm talking about a building that has no electricity. The light comes in through windows. They're doing things like it's 1825, because that's the good way, according to them. Right now, you can go places, by comparison, that don't have Wi-Fi. In the future, if you don't have Wi-Fi, people aren't going to shop at your business when every other business has it. You're going to be the company that doesn't have electricity. It's going to be a preposterous concept. But that's not yet today. But more and more, customers are expecting Wi-Fi wherever they go. The airport, they go to the store, they go to the market, they go wherever they go in a business, they expect Wi-Fi. The coffee shop, the restaurant. But not everybody's on board with this yet, and especially in rural America. This was also true of electricity. Think about that. Evie Miller says, I love this build. It is a very attractive build, I do admit. And when we put the right parts in it so it's not overcrowded, it should look fantastic. I did a poor job of pairing the parts together. I just oversimplified the thought process. And I made an assumption that a case this big would accommodate, and it doesn't. The case doesn't really need to be this big because it doesn't add much more capacity for us, even though the size of it is massive. The cable management's not any better than a regular tower case. It's about the same. This whole front area is pretty much useless. It doesn't accommodate anything other than a spinning dial and a couple of fans we don't need. So there's an additional 7 inches of case here for no good reason. And I thought because it was larger that it would accommodate larger and more components. Sometimes that's true, but not on this case. And that was a wrong assumption on my part. And I found out the hard way because we've had to disassemble parts that were too big for this case and then reevaluate now that I had it in front of me, because it's not a popular case. I don't have a lot of reference. But once I had it in front of me with some experience, that I could say, okay, now I know what's going to fit in there. It's a minor correction for somebody like me, but it could be a very major, expensive lesson for you. And I hope you learn that from my videos, and I hope you learn that from my mistakes, because of the type of work I do. I can afford those mistakes typically easier than you guys can. I can repurpose other equipment into other machines. If you're just building for yourself, I don't want you cursing me out. Damn it. Gary made it out like I could put whatever I want in this giant case. Turns out it's no better than a smaller case at half the price. I didn't know, and this is how I learned. Now, the more popular cases, you'll probably figure that out just from watching other content creators with NZXT and Corsair and Cooler Master. But with Cougar, you don't see these very often. which is part of the attraction on why I want to use it. I don't want to do what everybody else does. I want to provide you with unique content. It may not be the only content featuring this case, but I guarantee you there's fewer videos on this case than of NZXT cases, Corsair, Cooler Master, and other large manufacturers, Leon Lee. You won't see this as often. In fact, you might not have ever seen it before now. I wouldn't be surprised.
Take the mouse out.
What happened to the Dragon? Huh? I was just asking. Yeah, I have the Dragon. It's, hold on. I gotta walk around here to get it.
Or put the little robot guy.
He's too big.
Is he too big?
Oh, that little guy?
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That was what we were gonna put in there. Like that? You want me to take the...
Yeah.
Put it over there. Dennis Hill says, do you think they're going to build processors on motherboards for AI? Neural processing units are already part of modern AMD and Intel chips. They're already on there, measured by trillions of operations per second, or TOPS, if you ever hear that. So they're already there. On top of that, they're making small cluster models with ASIC processors and even Raspberry Pis, where they stack 10 or 15 of them in a little tiny thing. If you watch Jeff Geerling, he'll show you stuff like this on YouTube if that's of interest to you. I don't know what you do with it, but they're already doing it. And that will continue to expand and grow, I'm sure. Unlike virtual reality, which didn't really ever catch on, they keep trying and they keep failing. With AI, that's absolutely the future, and it will be moving forward, but mostly in a business sense. For home users, I don't know how much value it has. But there's always going to be a home user out there that needs it. But until they start releasing advanced software that home users use, and these are going to be creators we're talking about, not consumers, but the home users that do content creation with AI built into things like Adobe Premiere or Microsoft Word or Office, the AI can then help make you more productive as the AI improves and gets better. At one point, we're going to reach a point where we wonder how we ever lived without it, and we will become dumber. All the basic knowledge we have, we will lose because the AI will do it for us. We will no longer be able to justify practicing that in the knowledge because we don't need to. It's happening for us. And that makes us more efficient, but at the same time, the number of people who understand how that works will go down and down and down to the engineers and the niche hobbyists that care about those details. Well, the general public will think themselves smart simply because they're telling the AI to do it for them. If I had a butler that could answer my door and do my laundry and cook my dinner and wash my dishes, and I have lived a long time that way, and then suddenly I'm without and I have to do it myself, I may have to read instructions on how to do laundry. Like, it's something I just haven't done in a long time. It's been taken care of for me. One of my favorite jokes is Ricky Gervais, a British comedian, has been accused of being so wealthy that he no longer associates with the everyman. And the example he gives is pretty hilarious, where a reporter says, you know, you're not relatable anymore because you're wealthy, and the vast majority of your audience are just regular folks living paycheck to paycheck. Do you even know what a gallon of milk costs? In other words, does Ricky Gervais still go to the grocery store and buy his own groceries? Not likely. It'd probably be very difficult for him to do that without getting mobbed and prevent him from being able to accomplish his goal. So there's a safety concern. But more importantly, what does he care? So in other words, the response that Ricky Gervais gives is brilliant. So when asked, do you have any idea what a gallon of milk costs today? His answer is, here's 100 pounds, that should cover it, right? And he's done. That is the funniest answer, and the most clever answer. He's so wealthy, it doesn't matter. How much is it? $4? $8. Here's a $100 bill. Will that cover it? Fine. You can even keep the change. What do I care? I love that answer. He doesn't know because he doesn't care. He doesn't have to. So does that mean he's no longer relatable to people? Well, I'm not quite sure that that has anything to do with his comedy, but at the end of the day, are people still buying tickets to his show? Because if they are, he's obviously relating to them on other levels. John says, now love the dragon. Oh, that dragon was built to be in that case. And I have some little square Velcro stickies, and I'll put a Velcro sticky on that little turntable, and then the opposite Velcro will stick on the bottom of the dragon, and that way it won't topple over when you bump the case. That is a problem with a display case, especially one that's got fans turning and vibration, and if it's on the floor or it could be knocked or moved, it's going to fall over. So the little Velcro is all you need to sort of keep it in position, and obviously with enough force you'll still break it free, but hopefully you're not that harsh on your computers. Where you take the thing out before you move it, probably be a better idea. Lawrence PR says he's leaving, preparing to leave New Jersey, so I'll catch up with you all next week from home. Right on. Safe travels. All right, guys, I think that'll wrap it up for today. Thank you again for hanging out with me and understanding all of the exposition that I put forward prior to and sometimes at the end of my videos that, you know, is accommodating what I feel is important to convey, as well as giving you the opportunity to convey what's important to you or what's on your mind with a build in the middle. It's kind of how today's worked out. I like that format, and I enjoy hanging out with you guys, and thank you for making it enjoyable. And for making it so worthwhile, because I do get a lot back from your participation. And thank you, of course, to all of our members who make these videos possible. ASRock has not sent us anything. Tryx has never sponsored us. Intel has never sponsored us. Crucial's never. This has all been paid for, no differently than how you at home pay for it. And it's through this community that we're able to buy this stuff. Without you guys, I don't know who'd we be making videos for, or how would we even be able to finance them? So long as you stay interested and supportive, I will continue forward with you joining me on this journey. I really appreciate each and every one of you. A special shout out, of course, to our friend Buster, also to Charlie Purdy and Mark Gaines and many other numerous folks who are extraordinarily generous beyond regular membership, who help underwrite the cost of these videos. Good to see our friend Steve Bass in there. I hope he's doing well. We'll have to catch up. It's been a while since we've talked. And for the rest of you, enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thanks to Marlena, our channel administrator, for all the work she does, from thumbnail creation, updating video notes, answering your emails. If you want to reach out to us, speaking of email, just send an email right here anytime. We love hearing from you guys. Also, our friends over at SCD Keys, where you can get 30% off legitimate legal license keys for Windows and Microsoft Office. That includes 6 months of free support. I don't make money off of commission. If you buy that and you want to save money and know that you're buying from a reputable seller that isn't going to rip you off or abandon you after the sale, I'm trying to help you. Okay, if you don't want the help, that's fine. Don't do it for me. Do it for you. I want to be very clear. There's no sellout happening here. That is where I buy my product keys for my businesses, my clients. And it's how I can be competitive in the market and not skirt the law. Everything I do is on the up and up. Some of my clients are lawyers. You can imagine if I was doing something shady and they found out about it, going to court for them is just another day. For me, that would be, let's just say, uncomfortable and expensive. So whatever amount of money you think you're making by exploiting the system in that way will likely come back to cost you a lot more later. And if it's good enough for me and my business, it should be good enough for all of our viewers. And they sell their keys worldwide, so you don't have to be in the United States to take advantage of the offer. All right, that'll wrap it up. Thank you again for hanging out. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. We'll see you this weekend as we complete this build with the installation of the Panorama 360, and I hope you'll join us then. Until next time, bye for now.